Once again, good morning and welcome to the October meeting of the Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Tom Ashton and Chairman of this committee. I would welcome all of those watching the meeting online and just remind everybody that your comment will remain accessible as the recording will be on our website. There is no planned fire drill this morning. In the event of the alarm, please leave the chamber by the rear and assemble in the car park. Please ensure that mobile phones, etc. are on silent, and when invited to speak, please do so through the microphone. Moving on to the formal agenda, Jess, do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We've not received any apologies today.
Thank you. It's always great to see that we've got a full complement of enthusiastic people, so thank you very much for that. Declaration of interest, does anyone have any at this stage? If something comes up during the course of the meeting, by all means wave and we can record it at the time. Minutes of our last meeting, 24th of June. I appreciate it seemed at one time we were meeting nearly every other week, and with the advent of summer it's been a little while since we last assembled. So the minutes are on pages 5 to 15 of our agenda pack. Do I have your agreement to sign those? Do we have a proposer and a second, please? Thank you and thank you. Agreed. Any objections? No. Thank you. Chairman's announcements, not a huge amount from me, just to mention that I did attend a meeting of the Internal Drainage Board LGA Special Interest Group last week, which was a particularly illuminating and good opportunity to speak with MPs and ministers down in Westminster on what is, I'm sure, an important issue to many of you. It continues to terrify me just how many senior and august people that have been around this issue for so long continue to think that for some reason drainage boards should or are responsible for water coming down the rivers from cities. It's a significant job of work, I think we've got explaining to them that only really happened when something has gone badly wrong. Those lobbying efforts, I'm sure, will continue apace to try and get a resolution on what is, as I know, an important issue for many people around this meeting room. Do we have any, and so just welcoming Councillor Davey, who joins us online to give his update, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll start with flooding during the early autumn of this year. As you'll all be aware, some flood-hit areas in England saw their wettest ever September, with very heavy and persistent rain, particularly affecting large parts of the Midlands, with yellow weather warnings spread across the whole of the east of England. Many homes and businesses and roads were submerged in some areas, and some areas recorded 3 times their average September rainfall. It made it the wettest September since records began in 1836. I would also say that in Lincolnshire, we experienced some periods of heavy rainfall during September and into early October. Thankfully, the impacts were less severe than in other parts of the Midlands and the South, although not without issue. During the last week of September and the first week of October, a number of flooding incidents were recorded across the county, some of which affected properties, including in Stamford, Lincoln, Gainsborough and the Skegness area. This has resulted in 11 new Section 19 investigations being instigated. This, of course, comes very close to the anniversary of Storm Babette, which caused widespread impacts across Lincolnshire in October of 2023. I can confirm all Section 19 investigations linked to that storm have now been completed and submitted by the Consultants Commission to carry out the work on behalf of the Council. These reports are currently going through internal quality assurance processes. It should be pointed out that engagement across a number of communities to look at potential solutions to the flooding experience has been taking place in parallel to the formal Section 19 process. Further information is contained in the committee report, which is part of today's agenda pack, which we'll discuss later. Following the flood forum hosted by Victoria Atkins MP in Horncastle on the 1st of March 2024, An action was taken by the council in its role as lead local flood authority to undertake a peer review of the reports produced by the Environment Agency into the operation of the Horncastle Flood Relief Scheme. This review was to assess the validity of the approach taken within the reports to assess if this was reasonable and appropriate. The peer review report has been completed and is also included within today's agenda pack for wider discussion by yourselves on this committee. The latest monthly water situation report by the Environment Agency for the Lincolnshire Northamptonshire area, covering September 24, shows that following a notably dry August, September saw significantly wetter conditions with exceptionally high rainfall, as I said earlier. Totals range from 173% to 346% of the long-term average, classifying the rainfall as notably high to exceptionally high across the 6 areas. This made it the second wettest September on record for the region. The southern part of our region received more rainfall than the north, making it the wettest September on record for the Upper Welland and Nene area. As a result of the exceptionally high rainfall, soil and moisture deficits decreased significantly across the region, particularly in the south. River flows have increased dramatically, most notably in the Welland and Nene areas, where all indicator sites recorded record high monthly mean flows. For September, groundwater levels remained high and are expected to continue increasing in October due to the heavy rainfall seen at the end of September. With regards to rainfall, the water year 23-24 has been the wettest since 1882-83, and largely due to last winter's wet conditions. As a result, the 12-month trend continues to display exceptionally high totals. The forward look over this coming winter period shows river flows at all sites are showing increased probability of greater than normal flows, whilst groundwater levels are showing a greatly increased probability of exceptionally high levels. So I want to touch on some delivery of flood and drainage works programme. Continued investment by the authority to tackle flood risk issues allows the flood and water teams to have successfully completed 2 surface water improvement schemes this year. First in Broughton was completed on the 5th of July 2024 to provide increased levels of protection to the community. The scheme saw a replacement and improvement of existing surface water drainage system and damaged footway, providing benefit to properties at flood risk along with wider community benefits. This cost us £130,000. The second in Hoffham the Hill was completed on site on the 6th of September 24 to provide replacements to the existing surface water drainage, introduction of new gullies, curbing, surfacing, etc. And this cost a total of £205,000. In addition, enhancement works have also been undertaken on the existing flood relief channel in Waddingham, which has increased capacity and resilience to that village. This work was successfully completed in collaboration with the Ancone Internal Drainage Board and local landowners. The team have 2 further schemes anticipated to be completed before the end of this financial year. The first in Kirkby-on-Bain started on site on the 9th of September 24 and is expected to be complete by March of next year. This scheme is costing a total of £964,000 and will certainly improve the residential properties within the village and protect them better. Second in Long Beddington is anticipated to start in early 25, and this is the second phase of the scheme, which was completed in November of 23. This scheme will look to improve collection of surface water in the southern section of the village, in the area immediately outside of the primary school. Again, increasing high-raised gullies, renewing lateral connections, and a new length of drain to be installed. This will cost a further £200,000. Further details in the pipeline of the current capital project to be delivered can be found in the supporting committee report. I'll just go touch on the government's new task force before I finish, Chairman. The government have launched a new task force which will coordinate flooding preparation and provide long-term strategic thinking to better protect communities. It is stated the task force will turbocharge the development of flood defences and bolster the nation's resilience to extreme weather when it was convened for the first time on the 12th of September. and this was announced by the Secretary of State, Steve Reed. The task force brings together many sections of government, the Environment Agency, Met Office, mayoral offices, emergency responders, and the NFU, among others. This comes as the current Met Office outlook suggests this autumn is likely to be wetter than usual. The task force has also outlined its plans to take a long-term strategic approach to the challenges of flooding. This will support better protection for families across the country, as well as underpinning the resilience of the economy to the growing threat of weather change and climate change. These challenges include ensuring that funding for national infrastructure remains sustainable in the future. And just to restate the fact we should all remember, 5.5 million properties in England are at risk from flooding, and the country has just experienced the wettest 18 months on record, following the extreme weather of last year. The next meeting of the task force is due to take place in early 2025 and will discuss longer-term oversight of wider flood resilience strategy and investment, as well as any rapid learning on the response to major flooding. I just close with the thought that we now await the government's budget on the 30th of this month, where they will announce departmental budgets and spending. I have been very clear that I expect to see the Environment Agency's work protected. We need more money to be spent on flood protection and flood resilience going forward. So any cuts in those budgets will be a backward step. I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Question from Councillor Baxter, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the update, Councillor Davey. Does Councillor Davey think it's acceptable for people of Gretford to be still living in temporary accommodation since the storms of January? Does Councillor Davey think that the role of Environment Agency and Anglian Water in particular is part of the problem, and does he think that those two organisations are doing enough to prevent further flooding? And thirdly, does Councillor Davey think it's acceptable for blue pipes to be laying right across, scarring the whole of Lincolnshire in order to bring water from the north down to Essex?
Councillor Davey.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Baxter, for your thoughts. No, I don't think it's acceptable that anyone has to live in temporary accommodation after flooding incidents. We accept that these storms we had last winter were exceptionally severe, but getting people back into their own homes is of critical importance. So no, it's not acceptable. It's understandable because of the scale of the storms, but it's not acceptable. In relation to your last point, again, it's not acceptable to have our landscape scarred in the way it is. And as you know, meetings have taken place to urge a speeded up process to get those pipes reburied back into the ground. So again, we have to use our authority as much as we can, but we are not fully in charge of the actions of others. We have to encourage through our strategic partnership and our work together in partnership to get things done in a better way. So I'm very clear. Our relationships with other agencies is of critical importance, and it is a two-way street. We have a role as lead local flood authority to ensure that our partners fulfil their obligations to the best of their abilities and to the maximum of their capabilities. And I will continue to press that, and I'm sure the work of this committee will also want to look at that through the reports that are in front of you today. Hopefully that covers it, and if you have any questions, Councillor Baxter, please feel free to drop me an email and I'll answer them in more detail.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any further questions for Councillor Davey? Well, thank you very much for your update, Councillor Davey. It's much appreciated, and I'm sure we're all grateful for it. I understand you're sticking around online for the rest of the meeting, so if there are questions or points that come up that need answering, that would be great to have you there in that role to do that. That takes us on to item 5, which is the flood and water team update that includes the Section 19 investigations and is covered on pages 17 to 61 of the agenda pack, and I'm sure you will appreciate has, in addition to the usual report, the technical peer review assessment of the Environment Agency's previous review of the impact of Storm Babbitt in Horncastle. But I shall hand over to Matthew to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. As usual, if I may, I will take the report as read, but just pick up on some of the pertinent points and obviously open up for questions afterwards. A little bit more of a substantial report this time around, but perhaps not surprising, bearing in mind the impacts of Storm Babbitt and Storm Henk that we are still dealing with, not least with the number of Section 19 investigations that we have been dealing with as a consequence of those two events. So an update on the Section 19 investigations. Just as a point of clarity, it's pleasing to report that we have no outstanding Section 19 investigations prior to Storm Babbitt. So those that are active and being reviewed at the moment are those that are as a result of Storm Babbitt and events that have happened since, including Storm Henk. All of the reports that were commissioned to the 3 consultants to deal with the Section 19 investigations following Storm Babbitt and Henk have been completed and received into the Floods and Water team. Some of those that have been quality assured and checked have already been distributed, and currently quality assurance checks are going ahead through the team on the remaining reports. I know we initially said that we had the ambitious target of the end of August to have all of those reports completed, bearing in mind we were dealing with a number of Section 19 investigations from these 2 events that were more than what we had dealt with in any previous year or period since 2012. It was quite an unprecedented piece of work. But I'm pleased to say that most reports were in fact received by the end of August, and all were completed by the end of September. So it is now just the quality assurance process that we're going through. However, as we have said previously in committee, we don't have to wait for the outcome of the formal Section 19 investigation report to consider any actions that could be taken. We obviously received a lot of data, evidence and information from partner organisations, residents, landowners and so on and so forth. And through the Floods and Water team, we have already been working with 40 plus communities across the county in parallel to the Section 19 process to look at any improvements or mitigation measures that could be taken, or indeed understand even better what might have happened by commissioning any modelling work or further investigation. And I do know that from talking to colleagues in other organisations, they have also been carrying out work as well in parallel to this process. There's a number of sort of committees and subgroup meetings that have been set up, including local people and parish councils that we've been involved with. And a number of those have also been active across the county, as well as more broader projects such as a Lower Witham Sustainable Recovery Pilot, which is looking at the impacts of the flooding that occurred, particularly to agricultural land and those people that were affected in the Lower Witham and Barlings areas. So there's a joint project going on there amongst a number of stakeholders. The emerging picture of what has occurred from the Section 19 investigations is quite varied. It is no surprise that the exceptional rainfall that we did receive following Babbitt, which was then exacerbated by Storm Henk, led to these issues where many systems were overwhelmed and record river levels were seen, and in some cases record rainfall levels over that period, as has already been described. So the emerging findings are summarised in the report, and that will be an emerging picture as all of the Section 19 investigations are signed off. Just to bring you up to date and following on from what was mentioned in Councillor Davies' announcement, since Storm Henk, we have had 19 new Section 19 investigations commissioned since the 9th of January, that date being determined as to being after what was formally recognised as after Storm Henk. And as Councillor Davies said, 11 of these reports have been commissioned in just the last few weeks because of the rainfall events that we've had at the end of September and early October. The next part of the report covers the peer review of the Environment Agency documents that were produced as the linked to the operation of the Horncastle Flood Relief Reservoir, and that report is attached as an addendum to this report. As you'll see from that report, recommendations have been made, and I will obviously leave for Environment Agency colleagues to make comment on those recommendations further. Moving on, just to again summarise the flood recovery framework, which was the government grant announced post storms Babette and Henk to give funding available to assist with property flood resilience measures for those people who were affected by internal flooding from those two events. The County Council has been administering that grants process with DEFRA, and we have been successful in securing some additional funding, so at least all of those people who have submitted expressions of interest for property flood resilience measures will at least have a survey undertaken on their property, so they understand what measures may be able to be taken in the future. We are also now moving to a phase from those initial properties that were approved where installation measures will be starting to take place over the coming weeks, which is a positive step for those who have been affected. The current capital programme works is summarised in the next stage of the report, and I won't repeat what Councillor Davies said in respect of those schemes that have been completed. Just looking on the agenda pack, I do apologise. I don't think the table is reproduced particularly well and is quite fuzzy, so if that needs to be recirculated, I'm more than happy to do so, but that does give an overview of the current forward programme, and obviously that is a consistently evolving picture as we take account of the recommendations that come out of the Section 19 investigations, and they are factored in as to where programmes of work might be undertaken. I will leave it there, if I may, Chairman, but as always, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a number of speakers. I'll take them. Councillor Haigh first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it possible, Matthew, that the county councillors at least will receive copies of those reports? Now, I appreciate that some of the information might be kept within these four walls, so to speak, but if the councillors could at least be aware of the outcome of the reports, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Haigh, and just to confirm that all county councillors will receive a copy of the reports within their areas once they have gone through the quality assurance process. You will be the first to receive those reports once they have been authorised prior to being seen by anybody else, so you will have a sort of advance notice of what's in that report, so you're prepared and cited in case you receive questions from your constituents.
Thank you. Councillor Bunny.
Thank you. I was just really wanting to know about Market Raisin, Matthew. Our main flooding was, as you know, in 22, which was before Storm Babette, and we're still waiting, I believe, for that report to come back on the Section 19. Or was it got tied up with the subsequent flooding which happened in Section at Storm Babette?
No, that report is now complete, so we can let you have a copy, and in parallel to that, as you'll be aware, we have been carrying out the modelling work and further detailed investigation work over the past few months. Obviously, Market Raisin was quite complex in that it was town-wide. It affected a number of areas with a number of different influences there, and that modelling work will then influence what measures we may look at, both from our side of things, from Lincolnshire County Council's point of view, but also partner organisations as well. So no, we can make sure you're cited with that, Councillor Buddy, and obviously provide you with the latest update following the modelling work, for which we are expecting a further update in the team very soon.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Following on from what Councillor Baxter's already asked the questions with regard to Grateford, many of us did do a site visit to Grateford early in the year. We know that it's been a very wet end of September and the beginning of October. And it was very sad to learn that already the residents of Gretford have been in peril yet again. I think, I mean, as you members will know, I've been chairman and I've fielded questions and the exasperation of other members across the years. So, but you know, one of the things that they question, and I'm questioning here, is Section 19 investigations, the depth of them and how poor some of them are. Now, the residents of who we represent between all of us collectively are, you know, they're really, really upset. They're in a peril again of flooded properties. And a lot of the work could have been cleared up and more enforcement could have been made to actually help the situation. We all know, whether Anglian Water like it or not, that service water assets are theirs whether they like it or not. And there are still some issues there that could have been more expediently dealt with. We know that where landowners are concerned and riparian rights, there is enforcement within that locality that would help the flow of water there. And of course, the other thing that's been going on since 2018, and we did really sympathise with the people when we inspected how the water flow goes through, is there are collapsed water pipes in that region that have still not been properly or addressed, which is only concentrated one stage worse by Network Rail, who have got flooding issues that are still not sorted. And so that makes for the reasons for why the residents in this village are under threat of needing to be pumped out yet again and again. In all fairness, I know that we have an excellent officer in Richard Fenwick, and he has been trying to guide the peril of these residents to the best of his ability. But, you know, there's a lot of exasperation. There is a lot of sadness and anxiety that is caused by these situations. And for goodness sake, we're only halfway through October. It doesn't bode well for them and indeed other villages and towns alike. You mentioned Horncastle, Councillor Bunny. You know, we often talk about Market Raisin as well. And I just feel that we ought to be asking our officers, because that's what all we can really do, along with the agencies, to actually get on with getting these situations sorted. Time's passed, we can't do anything about that. Blame culture isn't going to help. But, you know, with the biggest plea in the world, we need these agencies to actually get on and get this work finished. I just sit here embarrassed. You know, we saw it at the beginning of the summer, late spring. And yes, there has been site meetings, I understand, monthly on with some willing players. And I know that Anglian Water have invested some money in what the situation is. And thank you on behalf of the residents for that. But all in all, it just ain't enough, and it just isn't good enough for the people that live in this particular region. We need a concerted effort to get these waterways cleared. They can be cleared, but they're not cleared. And they've not been attended to since this plight, since 2018. Now, that is 6 years, you know? That is 6 years. And that's 6 years of... And I've been on this committee during those 6 years, most of them, to be honest. And we need some concentration to see that this very sensitive area is looked after better than it is. And I join in supporting Councillor Baxter, because it's his division, in what he's asking for, very politely. more politely than me, to be fair, because I'm actually quite cross for these people. And I hope that we can make from today's meeting some further inroads to not assurances, but some delivery of further drainage help for the plight, particularly of the people of Gretford. Thank you very much.
Matthew.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. I think there's a few things to sort of unpick there and take those comments on board. I think just starting with the Section 19 investigations, as you can imagine, because of the number that we've been dealing with since Storm Babette and Henk, there's been a lot of focus on Section 19 investigations, their purpose, and what they're for and what we can expect from them in the sense of recommendations. I've, as a consequence, had conversations with a lot of people, residents, communities, parishes, etc., over the past few months, and attended many of these parishes myself, and in some cases seen firsthand what devastation it has caused for people. And it has been absolutely devastating for people over the last few months, and as Councillor Baxter has said, many people are still out of their homes as well, which is far from ideal. May I just ask, with the comment you made about the Section 19 investigations, was it sorry, I forget the word you used, the poor nature of them, or what they were? Would you be able to just expand on that? It may just help if I can then elaborate or give some context as to where we are, perhaps.
Yes, certainly. Well, I understand that, namely for Gretford, that there was 3 visits made to do with their Section 19. There was no announcement that any of these inspections were going to be placed. And of course, when things are so sensitive, a lot of the people affected would have liked to have been further involved in it. Now, it could well be put that they know what the situation is in Gretford, but it doesn't do any confidence that there's only been 3 consultations within the village at that point, and it. With the greatest will in the world, it's not the consultations that matters, it's the collection of these problems that need further addressing. And they should be coming out of enforcement from the Section 19 notices. And if it's not the first Section 19 notices that have come from Gretford, if they'd have been better enforced before the tragedies of last year, let alone what's posed for this year, then these residents would be better protected, and that's what they're asking for. It's not however shallow this particular Section 19 notice has been investigated, and I've been involved in others besides which I've received similar comments. I would imagine other councillors have too. But the plight of these people in particular seems to be right urgent and at the top of the list. And I would please ask that some further attention to Network Rail to get their situation sorted. The Drainage Board and enforcement of that particular section, they could have been making enforcements. How we know they're not easy. We all understand what the tasks are. But I really would have felt that more assertive attention could be made for these residents, because their peril is absolutely imminent. Every time it rains again. I've mentioned Richard Fanny, wonderful officer. I mean, the parish there actually have, and he's been very good at supporting the situations as they occur. But as we all know, they shouldn't be occurring at this level, and this is a very sensitive area that should have been sorted out, and it just hasn't been. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think what that highlights there is how recommendations are taken forward, perhaps more than anything from the Section 19 investigations. Just to very quickly pick up on Gretford specifically, as that's been mentioned. In addition to the site visits that the consultants undertook for that Section 19 investigation, myself and members of my team met with the parish council one evening, and we had a number of visitors come in there. That was really useful to get further information from them, and actually they put us in touch directly with some other people who we then subsequently went to speak with that were affected as part of that, which is all fed into the Section 19 process. It was also pointed out to us that some people didn't wish to be contacted and interviewed as part of the process for the fear of what that might mean if they are identified that they've been flooded. So we have to be a little bit sensitive to those issues and sort of take that on balance. With regards to recommendations, which I think, as you quite rightly allude to there, how they're taken forward and the actions, as you'll be aware from our legal local flood authority stance, recommendations are made, but we actually have no legal powers to compel anybody to undertake that work. But as Councillor Davey alluded to in his Executive Council comments, that's where we build on the strength of the existing flood and water management partnership, and we work very closely both internally within LCC, but also with our other risk management authority partners and stakeholders to see what solutions can be sought. What I would say is, yes, things are very important to try and seek resolution in Gretford, but as they are across the other 200 plus communities in Lincolnshire that were affected by Storm Babette and Henk, and that is something that certainly within the Floods and Water team we are very, very mindful of. And as I said in my summary and as highlighted in the report, certainly from Storm Babette and Henk, we have been actively working with 40 plus communities across the county in parallel to the Section 19 investigation. So we're not just sat waiting for recommendations to be made, because whilst the report formalises things in a formal report as our duty under the Flood and Water Management Act, we've had sufficient information to have a very good understanding as to what some of the causation has been in these locations. So a proactive response has been taken to try and work with communities and partner risk management authorities as well. There's been some very active groups, Tallington being one of them, where we've had active groups and have recently got some success working with Anglian Water and Network Rail as well. So I think you rightly highlight that some of these issues are quite complex in that they cover a multitude of different organisations and individuals, but the point is absolutely taken that the recommendations are the important element of a Section 19 investigation to see where we can take things forward to look for suitable resolution and mitigation measures wherever possible.
Thank you.
Can I be allowed just to come back?
Briefly, Councillor.
It is very briefly. We have all seen on our televisions the impact of Hurricane Milton. We all know that it's now somewhere in the Atlantic. We know that it'll be downgraded by the heat that it has to support it because the Atlantic is much cooler. But the tail end sometimes does land our way, of which we will all have our fingers crossed. But it's just round the corner, Chairman, so we are likely to have that amongst other rainfall eventualities to worry about. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of bits to pick up on from that discussion. Obviously, in our working group this afternoon, we have a bit of a deep dive on some of the Section 19 investigations, and I've asked officers to take us through those in some considerable detail as to how they're formulated, how we get there, what the mechanics of that looks like. So hopefully that will be a useful exercise for members that will be part of that. Further, just picking up on the Grateford stuff, because again, really pleased to be able to attend twice, once with the site visit and once subsequently at the invitation of residents to meet with the Environment Agency. Do we know what progress, if any, is being made in partnership with perhaps the parish council suggested at the time on desilting the Grateford Cut? And I mean, the reason I ask this is really to reinforce the point that Councillor Reid is making. I can't help noticing that after what would have been a considerable flooding event in the 1950s, a 7-mile bypass channel was dug to get that water away. And I'm thinking that in 2024, the idea of digging a 7-mile channel, we would be literally 20 years before we got one dug. And all we really, but there is clearly a need to take some mud out of that where it comes out of that sluice gate on the West Glen River. I was just wondering how those discussions are going and at what stage something is likely to happen.
those will be the sorts of discussions that will be had following the recommendations, and I'm aware that other organisations are very much aware of the circumstances that occurred during the event. I may perhaps pass to colleagues from other organisations here who may be better placed than I to make a comment or otherwise on the any maintenance programme of such watercourses.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. The Environment Agency, as it currently is, they need to replace the flap and bung the culvert at the bridge. Currently, it has a poly sheet and sandbags that are fixing it for the temporary. You know, those are the sort of things that we need further addressed. We need further action on. And can I please appeal to the Environment Agency just to get on? It's not the most difficult thing to do. But, you know, we've visited, we've seen, you've attended the meetings and whatever, and here today we are discussing a situation that we've got poly sheets and sandbags as a temporary fix still. It's just simply not good enough. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Environment Agency colleagues to pick that up under their update later on our agenda. Appreciating we have a number of speakers picking up on Matthew's report. So Wendy, please.
All I'll say, Councillor Reid, is welcome to my world. There's lots of, I will just defend the EA actually, because obviously I as you all know, I had quite a few of my parishes flooded in October, as well as 2019, 2013 and 2007. And we do have sheets as well. But I will just defend the EA because they do have 9 breaches, and actually I've got plastic on the steeping, which would have caused a breach if they hadn't have put plastic on it, but then we have got further 9 breaches over the Lincolnshire, so I would actually prefer them, and I know it's not helping, but I prefer them to do the breaches first. But back to my problem, Sandy Lane, great steeping. Obviously it's not on any list. They have flooded since 2007 6 times. Last week, Anthony Marston, Tanglewood Sandy Lane, was flooded for the 6th time since 2007. He's been back in his property 3 months. He flooded, obviously, in October. I attended there on last week with both the EA and the Drainage Board. EA did levels, very good. You know, we've looked at the problem. We know what the problem is. What I'm asking this committee is that we can give him some assurance that we will do something. Those 4 properties have been flooded 6 times since 2007. And when that water rises on the Ladyworth Beck, it goes over. It can't go under the bridge, it can't get into the steeping. We've got 650 houses going up in Spilsby. When those 650 houses go up, they stand no chance. They are bungalows, they can't do anything. What we can do for them is build a flood wall around their property. Flood walls would cost £12,000, approximately £12,000 each to save those 4 properties. So it would cost probably £25,000 we could save those properties. What I'm asking today is between Lincolnshire County Council, the Environment Agency and the Drainage Board, Lindsay Marsh, and the property owners, they are willing to contribute, that we give them some assurance that we will go there and we will try and help them.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that absolutely support looking at doing something there, because they've been absolutely devastated, as you quite rightly point out, not just in recent events but in previous years as well. And I know certainly this last few weeks, as you alluded to, Environment Agency colleagues have been looking at Ladyworth Beck and what's been going on there. I haven't seen the outcome of those discussions personally yet, but obviously I will get an update in due course. I'm aware that, as you said, one person has already taken action themselves to build a bund around their property at considerable expense, and some of the other residents around that location also have current applications in with us as part of the property flood grant that was announced following storms Babette and Henk. But as we know, property flood resilience measures are effective to a point. So from Lincolnshire County Council's point of view, we've had conversations, Councillor Bowkett, we would look at supporting whatever we can, but I think as you quite rightly point out, it would need a range of individuals and organisations to come together to be effective at this location because of the causes of the flooding that we're seeing experienced. So I hope that's some help from my point of view.
Just quickly, thank you very much. Yeah, I will be in the EA's report. I will be asking their support as well, because after Monday, seeing the devastation of Anthony's wife, I will just say that she is very, very poorly over these last years, and she's really, really struggling. And I have offered them, well, I've said to them, I've let them down, I've failed. I think we've all failed them. And I know we've failed other people as well, but this particular family we have failed.
Thank you. I have Councillor Skinner, then Councillor Fleetwood, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Amongst all the masses of flooding and the thought that our drainage system, certainly the pipe system, is no longer fit for purpose on volumes, whether it's sheathed with something else, we all as the partnership, and we've been hearing some very good partnership stories this morning, it's the strength of the partnership that actually will drive these things on. And I'm very grateful in Old Leek for the work that Anglian Water have done there. But over this last 12 months, Chairman, I've been acutely aware that not all of surface water belongs to AW, and occasionally we come across things, little things that have been built by other partners that need following up on estates that were built in the 60s. And, you know, even though those people have got near misses, they still require some work before they do damage to property, etc. And some of these things are really serious, as are some of the riparian responsibilities that we don't seem to be able to enforce either to the maximum. So what I'm asking, Chairman, that all partners in this room do their buy-in and follow up their responsibilities. It won't happen with just one of them. But to sum up, some of it's been already mentioned, but as you know, I do like to travel down some of these waterways. And I can say, hand on heart, since 2007, both for Louth and Horncastle, the channels are not to the original design spec. I was heartened actually this morning to see Witham Third doing some work on the Bain. So that's, but most of these are shallowed by sand, and the volumes of water then are held up higher on the banks, which increases the pressure and therefore the risk of more flooding. But our friends on the IDBs will tell you what the basic channel clearing, maintenance and bushing, how much difference they make. So I appeal that certainly in the centre of Horncastle, which in 2007 you could pass through, you will have a job to get from the weir in the town centre now, by canoe, by boat. All of that is blocked up, and that has got to make a big difference to clearance, etc. Thanks, Chairman.
Yes, thank you. And I think actually you raise a very good point there, Councillor Skinner, in that we've highlighted the roles and responsibilities that organisations have here, and obviously that has comments taken on board. But also there's the roles and responsibilities of riparian owners as well. And from some of the information that we've been receiving back from the Section 19 investigations, it clearly highlights that often, amongst other things, the condition of riparian watercourses has potentially been a contributing factor to some of the flooding. So I think it's only fair to, that we all, not just organisations, but in individuals as well, sort of flooding is a societal thing, whereas collectively we can all make a difference. So that is as organisations, but as individuals as well. And certainly condition of riparian watercourses is a key factor in that. Thank you.
Councillor Fleetwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I was watching the BBC this morning. Somebody has to, I suppose. I watch GB News as well and other channels. But I was watching the BBC, and on the news, I think they announced that the Environment Agency have announced that this week is National Flood Week, where they're trying to encourage people to protect their properties better. And the EA are actively trying to promote people not getting flooded. We're looking at a Section 19 reporting here, and this is great, and it's great that we hear that Matthew, on behalf of the LCC, have said that anything prior to Babette has now been addressed on Section 19, but in the defence of the organisations, And listening to Councillor Reid, and I know we've got the beginning of the storm season coming in, what next? And the answer is the resource within the systems to actually cope? Let's say that if next week there was another storm surge, which Milton is somewhere, and it could create something. If there was an issue next week, how would all of the organisations be able to cope with it? And that's something for Matthew, but it's also a question for the other organisations too. Bearing in mind the EA are still trying to deal with banks that have been breached. The drainage boards are still suffering from issues with regard to funding from last year, electricity, pumps not in place. And if by chance, let's say there was an issue on the Somerset levels and the Environment Agency needed to move the pumps away from Lincolnshire, that would leave a lot of Lincolnshire exposed, because there is still a backup for the drainage boards in a lot of locations with Environmental Agency pumps. And I don't know if anybody's given notice as to when those pumps might disappear, but where does that leave Lincolnshire? And I think we need to be looking around the corner, we need to be looking into the future. Yes, it's important we do deal with what we have now, but if we are going to see bigger and more robust storms and more water coming our way, we need to be ready for it. So how are each of the organisations going to deal with it?
Thank you, Councillor Fleetwood. And I am mindful in answering all of these questions that I'm not giving colleagues from other organisations an opportunity to probably put their point of view forward as well. But I'm sure they will do when given the opportunity. But I think just some comments on that. You absolutely rightly highlight the fact that the huge strain on resources and funding that events like Storm Babette and Henk have put across all organisations, not just Lincolnshire County Council. And as we know, we are seeing these events occurring more frequently, and those pressures are not going to get any less. I think at a local level, there is the absolute willingness to try and do as much as we possibly can across all organisations, and speaking on behalf of others here as well. But as Councillor Davey highlighted in his executive council comments, the government have now set up this task force to look at that, and I think some of the challenges do need to come from government and give that direction, so that at a local level we can be better prepared to deal with some of these events as and when they come, because as you quite rightly point out, we will be getting these again in the future.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Baxter, then Beale, please.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions. First of all, at the bottom of page 23, there's a reference to Table 2 on the next page, which is labelled Table 3. Can I assume that Table 2 mentioned on page 23 is actually the Table 3 mentioned on the following page? And then that table is what caught my attention. I don't understand it. I don't know if I'm supposed to understand it. It's something to do with the grants that are given to make properties more flood resilient. But I wonder if you could talk me through that table, because I don't get it. Secondly, this delay, the delay in the receipt of the Section 19 notices, is having a massive impact on people's lives. As Councillor Reid says, I mean, he says he's angry. I think I'm angry, but there's a lot of people who are angrier than me in Gretford, Tallington, I dare say Wainfleet and Horncastle, that waiting for these reports to come out. Did you tell us that the Section 19s from Babette and Henk are now finished, but they're waiting for the quality assurance? And if that is so, by what date will they be accessible to people who live in the properties affected? What do I say to the residents of Gretford and Tallington when they say, why is the process taking so long? Why am I still having to live in temporary accommodation? And to the parish councils in particular, who have made every effort and attended every meeting to be part of the process. What do I say to the residents about the intended actions? You've said, Chair, that you're aware of comments about the silt in the Gretford Cut and so on. Where would I find that information online? Where is that written down in the public domain that is a matter of a likely place where works will need to be done? I mean, the irony of the Environment Agency advising people to take flood prevention advice, I think that Councillor Boker is too sympathetic to the Environment Agency, because although they have breaches, some of those breaches are a result of the lack of maintenance over many years, not least for the last 14 years that everyone goes on about, but over many years the underfunded Environment Agency has not been able to keep on top of maintenance, and we're now paying the price. And it shouldn't be that they're spending time doing this because it's more important than that. It's all important. And finally, Tallington, could I have an update please on the Tallington project, if you call it, with regard to desilting the underneath the railway line? Thank you. Sorry about the barrage.
Not at all, and I can say categorically I wouldn't know where to find the Grateford Cut online, but I have stood on the sluice and looked at it, and I imagine if you look on Google Street View, it's been there long enough.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Councillor Baxter. So apologies regarding the misreferencing of the tables and for confusion there. Regarding the property flood resilience table, the explanation underneath was to try and give some clarity as to what the table meant and the process that we have taken in dealing with those applications. So if that isn't clear, I do apologise. But essentially what the table is showing is the number of applications that we have received for property flood resilience grant for Storm Henk, Storm Babette, in the batches that we've been dealing with, and we have broken those down into priority batches, and as explained a little bit further in the report, that shows where the reasoning is behind that. So those people who have been flooded multiple times, have particular vulnerability, depth of water seen in their properties, etc., influenced how those properties were batched due to the impact that people receive. RAB is the company that is carrying out the surveys for the property flood resilience measures that could be installed at the property, and those numbers give the number of surveys that have been completed. And WHC, as alluded to there in the report, as indicated in the report, I should say, White House Construction will be the installation company which will then be taking those forward, and that just indicates the numbers that have been passed to them. That at the moment isn't very many, because we've been at the stage where surveys have been carried out, but we are now moving into the phase where installation will start to be undertaken by White House Construction, where we have got the go-ahead to do that. The other details just show the number of expressions of interest that we had across the storms as well. Whilst we received expressions of interest, some residents have chosen not to go forward with some of those applications, which is personal choice, but we have liaised with them in due course to understand why that might be. Just to pick up on the Section 19 investigations, I don't believe there has been a delay as such. We always said that they would be completed by the end of August. We knew that there would be some that were more complex that would take a bit longer, which has turned out to be the case. Considering we've been dealing with over 260 here, which as we've said before, is on a scale that we've not seen before. So, as I say, some did take longer. By the end of September, all had been completed across Babette and Henk, and they are being distributed on completion. I think it's just worth reminding that, and as I've said in committee before, for me, the Section 19 investigation is the beginning of the conversation. It isn't the answer. The Section 19 investigation, as per the Flood and Water Management Act, is to highlight the causation of the flooding and identify those risk management authorities that may have responsibility. What we do through the Floods and Water team and do at Lincolnshire County Council is that we monitor those recommendations that come out of those reports with our partner organisations and internal departments, because for me, what happens following the recommendations is the important bit, because that's what people want to know, what is going to be done, what can be done, and when that will happen. Clearly, with the scale of what we're faced with following Babette and Henk, county-wide, 200 plus communities affected, it is taking a little bit of time to work through that. But again, as I've said, we understand what some of these issues are already in advance of the formal investigation being completed, and that's where engagement has already been taking place, and in some cases work's already happening. As regards Tallington, I'm aware that some work has been...
Sorry, could I just interrupt you there, in order to keep the debate together?
Sorry.
You said that there was no delay, yet the reports were supposed to be completed by the end of August, and they were completed by the end of September. That's confusing in itself. But if the reports were completed by the end of September, we're now halfway through October. Why haven't they been distributed yet? When will they be distributed? And why haven't we got any of the recommendations on this committee report? Or am I missing? Am I looking in the wrong place? I can't see any of the recommendations from the Section 19 reports in this report, and winter's coming.
Yeah, so let me, if I could just clarify. So from what has been discussed in previous committees, the initial batch of Section 19 investigations that were commissioned out to the 3 consultants, we had a anticipated end date of the end of August. That was the ambitious time that we set, acknowledging that some may take a bit longer due to complexity. We then had an additional batch of Section 19 investigations that were commissioned, which were ones that we had been made aware of following the original commission that was made, and that end date was the end of September. So combined between the two, all Section 19, the investigation process and the reports have been completed by the consultants, which is what the request was. What is now happening is the fact that we are going through the quality assurance process to make sure that they can then be released to elected members and those who have been affected. 90 reports have already been released. I'm unable to summarise all 260 plus reports in the report. That would make it a very large report, but within the report I have had to try to summarise just some of the key findings that we are starting to see come out of those investigations. But all, as I said earlier when Councillor Hayes raised the question, all elected members will get a copy of the Section 19 investigation report to see in advance of that being circulated more widely, so you'll be cited on what those recommendations are.
Could we have a date for that, please?
If there's any, well, we can let you know subject to which report it is you're particularly interested in, bearing in mind the number that we're dealing with. But if you wish to raise which reports you're particularly interested in, we can give you an indication when that will be.
Do you not have so there's 268 reports, of which 90 have already been released?
Yep. All of the reports are being worked through at this moment in time, and they will obviously be quality assured and checked off as they are worked through. So, as I say, if you're interested in any particular areas, please, and it goes for any members, please let me know, and we can give you a time scale on when that will be.
Will they all be completed by the end of November?
That's the ambition at the moment, but again, some reports are a lot more detailed and more complex than others. So, some extend to almost a few hundred pages. Some, subject to the circumstances, are less, depending on the type of flooding that was experienced. So it is a work in progress at the moment. Okay. Tallington, I can certainly get a date for you for that one. That's not a problem.
No, sorry. I interrupted you, and you were going to tell me all about Tallington.
No, apologies, yes. So Tallington, as you know, there's been a working group looking at Tallington, a multi-agency group, and I think we've had some success recently with Network Rail, or I say we, Anglian Water have, I believe, with getting some culverts cleared. For the latest position, I may defer to Anglian Water colleagues that can probably give you a bit more of a detailed summary on Tallington, with that for me.
If it would be helpful to pick on Tallington, I'm happy for you to do so. More than happy to cover it in your update shortly. I thank you very much, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Beale, then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. My basic question has been answered, but you're talking about quality control of the Section 19 reports you've had, that you're validating, checking. Sounds as if you're going to redact some of the information before they're released, because otherwise they cost a lot of money to prepare, and obviously the consultants have gone into a lot of detail. So, with respect, what is there for you now to do before those reports are issued? Thank you.
Yes, no problem. So we commissioned 3 consultants, as you're aware. Those consultants have experience of delivering Section 19 investigations for other authorities in the country. They haven't worked in Lincolnshire before. They are based outside of the county. So one of the things that we just want to check through is that they have captured local information correctly and recorded that correctly, such as names of watercourses and so on and so forth. And also just to make sure that it is a consistent format as we have asked for, as per the remit, and just to make sure that spelling mistakes, everything else, that we are comfortable having commissioned that piece of work, that they have produced the report as we asked, so that it is therefore fit for purpose to be distributed. So just basic quality assurance, no amendments. We will be checking that all information has also been taken into account. We received a huge amount of information, as you can imagine, following Storm Babette and Hank, and that information was coming in over a period of time, and sometimes we receive things months later. So it may be that whilst the reports were being compiled, information was coming afterwards. So also we're just checking that as much information as we've received has been included and taken account into those reports. So just a cross-checking exercise really to make sure the reports are fit for purpose to be distributed.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. You're in the hot seat today. Have received the S19 completed reports, but I wasn't the one who was flooded. What I want to know is, when can the residents not go on the website, because when they go on the website, we can't actually find the addresses. When can they actually be informed of that report? And also, I noticed when I received it, I was told there was a statement not for wider, whatever it was, So one of the residents has asked me, when I get that report, can I pass it to the insurance company? Because obviously someone was at fault when they got flooded. The second point is, and I raised this before in this committee, the whole issue of S19, how we deal with it, etc., is fine. But for the residents that got flooded in my area, there was a complete lack of communication. Even people saying they was let down by when they were flooded, which number to ring, and we've gone over this, there's so many different numbers, even to the point that when for an example, one of them rang the Anglo Walk Board and was told to, because we was inside the City of Lincoln boundaries, to ring City Lincoln Council. So there's all this frustration that can be dealt with if a clear message is given. The last one is the extra additional funding you mentioned. How many people have actually been granted that fund? And also, you mentioned the survey. The price of the survey comes out of the funding. Is that correct? Well, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The funding that has been made available to us via DEFRA as part of the grants process, the survey comes out of that funding. So whilst DEFRA have announced a £5,000 grant, in reality, the money available for actual installation measures is going to be in the region of closer to probably 4,200. That is a discussion that has been had by ourselves and other organisations for quite some time, that when these grant processes are announced, £5,000 is quite small and doesn't really meet the cost of what property flood resilience measures are. Unfortunately, that £5,000 has been that for a number of years now, and challenges have been made back to DEFRA to say that it really needs to be reviewed and be more in line with increased cost rises. But unfortunately on this occasion we are working to that DEFRA guidance, and on that you're absolutely right that the survey cost does come out of that overall £5,000. As regards those who have applied for the grant, I mean, potentially in Lincolnshire, we were in the region of 850 people who could have been eligible for the grant because they were internally flooded during the periods of Storm Babette and Henk. In reality, we have had around about 250 come forward to want to take the grant forward. And again, that is personal choice as to people that want to do that. But we are now able to offer at least surveys for all of those people, and some of those will be getting installation measures over the coming weeks as well. You touched on communication. We've talked about this obviously in committee before, and there's some lessons to be learned there from Storm Babette and Henk, and the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum in their debrief following both events have taken some actions for all organisations there. We are looking at a better way of people being directed to report relevant and pertinent information during a flood so that they get the best possible response subject to the circumstances that they face. And also working with district council colleagues so that if somebody rings an organisation in respect of flooding, they can get an answer or some clear instruction from that organisation rather than being passed around during obviously what's a very stressful time. So yeah, certainly very much a lot of discussion around that, and that messaging is absolutely acknowledged, I think, across the board. The reports, the Section 19 reports that are provided to yourselves as elected members in the first instance are unredacted. So all of the information is there, nothing is blocked out. As an organisation, we obviously have to comply with GDPR rules, data protection, and bearing in mind the reports contain personal information or identify individuals or individual properties, we can't send those reports out with that information because we would be in breach of GDPR. So residents will be notified of the report around about a fortnight to 3 weeks after you receive it as elected members. Those reports are likely to be redacted because what we've seen is that we're dealing with multiple properties in a single report, so that obviously highlights other people that have been affected. What I would say is, though, what won't be redacted is the main cause of what the flooding was and the recommendations. So whilst I acknowledge that there will be some bits that they won't be able to see, the core information, which I'm sure will be of interest in the sense of what was the causality and what is being proposed, will remain in the report, which I'm sure is the most interest to people.
Can you just clarify, the residents will be notified?
Yes, but it is likely to be a redacted report because of the GDPR, yes.
Thank you very much for that. Just if I don't see any further speakers indicating, splendid. Councillor Brooks, then I'll come on to Councillor Gray.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask a question about the riparian watercourses and systems, and in particular riparian culverts and pipes going under the highway. And I just wondered what sort of work is going on trying to identify the owners of these pipes and culverts, because most of them are not getting cleaned out properly and they're a block. They're ready to cause flooding at a later date. And I know people who are worried because they've got pipe systems under the highway where there's watercourses close to them, and they're worried that they're going to end up flooding their property. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it can be quite a complex issue in the eyes of the law with regards to common law and riparian ownership when it comes to some of the culverts, and it isn't always clear cut, as we have found from some of the issues that have got raised following Storm Babette and Hank, and we've had to look into both within my team and Highways colleagues as well as working with Internal Drainage Board colleagues. So generally speaking, open riparian watercourses is a little easier to deal with because you probably know who the responsible parties might be. To try and influence some work being undertaken. Culverts, as you say, can be a bit more of a challenge. Generally speaking, as a general rule of thumb, it still falls down to riparian ownership, but that's not black and white and it's not clear cut because it may depend on highway rights that go over it as well. So there isn't a clear-cut answer. It depends on circumstances, but often as a general rule of thumb, it can still fall down to riparian ownership of the culvert, and we would approach that in exactly the same way as we would do with an open watercourse. But as we've found from some of the circumstances following Babette and Henk, we've had to take some legal advice on some of these occasions to really try and understand what the correct course of action would be. So they are certainly looked into, but not always clear-cut.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I come back? Yeah, what worries me is, when they've created or caused a problem and this flooding has occurred, they get focus on them. But what worries me are the ones that are there and not getting cleaned out, and they're just a ticking time bomb for the future. And I think there should be a way of having some sort of cleaning rota and identifying where these are and who the riparian owners are, and telling them that they need to keep them cleaned out.
Thank you. And finally, we come on to Councillor Gray, who isn't a member of the committee but is a local member for Horncastle, and appreciating that we today are welcoming the peer review into the Environment Agency's report on the flooding in Horncastle as a result of Storm Babette. And I mean, just so that members are clear, I know Matthew mentioned this earlier, this report isn't to redo the work of the Environment Agency, it's effectively to mark their homework, it's not to do that homework again. But really pleased to see that it's on our agenda and a part of the appendices, and I'll hand over to Councillor Gray as the local member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I do want to talk specifically about the GeoSmart report, as you would imagine. And also thank you to the County Council for commissioning this independent report, because I think it's very important that that has been done. And thanks to GeoSmart for the report. The GeoSmart report was discussed at Horncastle Town Council last week on the 8th of October, when there were quite a few members of the public there. The Town Council, in fact, did question the remit and scope of the report, I have to say, and they believe that EA's data and the modelling should have been challenged. But concern was expressed specifically as why GeoSmart had not actually spoken to the landowners whose land formed the Horncastle flood storage reservoir, because they witnessed firsthand what happened on the 20th of October last year, and so their input surely is very valuable and necessary. Further concerns were expressed regarding peat flow rates from the Hemmingby Beck and West Ashby Beck, which are detailed in the report, as these becks are considerably restricted by culvert size. This considerably impacts the assumed discharge into the Bain, and so it was felt that that needs further investigation. Some members of the council felt that there was failure to carry out on-site investigations up and downstream of the Bain and the Waring, including the tilt gate on 50 acre. The tilt gate is seen by local people to be very, very important, and they don't feel it's been adequately maintained in the past. And of course, I think it's really, really important to remember that it's already been accepted and confirmed that a malfunction of the scheme occurred during Storm Babette, and several issues were identified. In fact, there are 7 recommendations there. And I'd just like to know, can the EA confirm that these recommendations have been implemented or are being implemented, so that residents can be more confident and more secure about the actual scheme itself? It states in the report about the flow gauge data at Victoria Mill, and this data was relied on as being accurate, but how accurate is that data? The gauging station data has not been proved, and this is necessary surely to support verification of the findings. And in fact, I believe, looking through the report myself, that there's too many modelling uncertainties and reliances on assumptions. With regard to the versus modelled data, which has not been made available, and GeoSmart consider the outcome of the impact assessment plausible, but of course it's not proven, because how can it be proved? A number of recommendations are shown on pages 52 and 53 of the report back, and I'd be keen to ask the committee to ensure that these recommendations are assessed and a report on the findings of these comes back to the committee, please. I mean, there's just so many assumptions in the report, but is that modelling correct? Because these assumptions were all based on models. You have all seen that there are 10 overall recommendations detailed at 4.2 on page 59 of the report. And can I ask that the committee undertakes to ensure that all these recommendations are in fact investigated independently and a report comes back to this committee? We've heard lots of talk about Section 19 reports this morning, which of course is very, very important. And there's a considerable amount of investigation into Section 19 reports going on in the Horncastle area. I look forward to seeing the release of those. I think I've got a lot that are coming to me, because 159 of my properties were subject to Section 19 investigation reports. I have only seen one so far, actually, which concerns some properties in Revesby. So there's a lot that I'm waiting to see, and I look forward to seeing those. And I just want to mention the River Waring and Thunker Drain, because that is mentioned in the report. Committee members will be aware that there has been considerable growth to Horncastle town. I know you've been to see the town, etc. And schemes were considered in other parts of the town in the past where the Waring and the Thunker are, but these were never carried forward because what wasn't the perceived need for them. But growth is in those areas now. So I'd like to ask the EA to ensure that they're reviewing the options to look at the viability of suitable schemes to protect properties around the Thunker Drain and the River Waring. I mean, Horncastle really was devastated. There was a lot of properties flooded. I mean, 159 properties are subject to Section 19 investigations, I've already said. So that's 147 dwellings and 12 businesses. And so the recommendations I've highlighted and the overall recommendations in the report really need to be taken seriously, because something needs to be done to make a difference so people don't have this worry in the future. So, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate the fact you've given me a chance just to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew and also Environment Agency colleagues, if you'd like to pick up these parts, it would be useful to do that under this part of the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Gray. So just to pick up on a couple of points there that you raised in your summary. So regarding the landowner engagement, just for clarity, as part of this exercise, which was the peer review into the Environment Agency reports on the operation of the flood relief reservoir, that was purely a look at the existing documentation that had been produced to assess its validity. The landowner details that have been provided to us and the reports and everything that we've received, they have been taken into account in the wider Section 19 investigation into Horncastle. So it isn't that hasn't been taken account of, it's just the circumstance regarding the different reports here to provide that element of clarity. I may stop there actually and pass to Environment Agency colleagues if they wish to make comment. As you rightly say, recommendations have been made out of the peer review report. These have been shared with the Environment Agency, and I know that colleagues are working through those, so I may stop there and hand to them if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions, Councillor. Great. I think the most important thing to point out is all of the recommendations in our Chief Engineer's report, which was one of the recommendations in the GeoSmart report, all the recommendations regarding the physical works at the sluice gate and the control mechanism for it, they have all been put in place and were put in place relatively quickly after Babette. So we are confident that the issue we saw shouldn't happen again, but we are dealing with complex electronics, and therefore we've taken additional measures just in case, in a very remote chance, there is an issue with those control measures. We've taken additional measures in closing the sluice gate partly. So if there was a problem, again, we believe that to be very, very rare. But if there was a problem, the impact would be even more reduced than they were in Babette. With regards to the GeoSmart recommendations, we are working through those, as a lot of them are involving sort of quite technical discussions with between ourselves, our consultants, and GeoSmart. Modelling is a complex process. It does involve assumptions, and because we are not, obviously we're modelling what we believe happened and comparing that with physical observed information. But we are working through that in the coming weeks, and the full report and response to those recommendations will go back to LCC.
Thank you, Councillor Gray.
Thank you very much for that. Is there any time scale for you looking through all those recommendations? I get that there are a lot of recommendations in the GeoSmart report. Do we have any time scale for that I can report back to my residents?
I'm hoping to have something in the next few weeks. There's an element of process in terms of commissioning the consultants and reviewing our work, GeoSmart work as well. But hopefully in the next 3 or 4 weeks, I'm hoping we can come back with something. Just to pick up again briefly on the Waring and Thunker Drain questions, we did look previously at the viability of a reservoir on the Waring. It didn't stack up previously, and we've just sort of refreshed those figures, and it still doesn't stack up in terms of economics. Thunker Drain was a complicated one, and we are working as part of a multi-agency group with LCC, Anglian Water, IDB and others. Thunker Drain, the flooding along Thunker Drain effectively had 3 different types of flooding. Some of it overland flow running down the hillside through houses into the drain, so properties that flooded as the water tried to get into the drain. In other parts it was water backing up where it met the Waring and then flooding out of the drain. So again, all of that is trying to be unpicked. And a key part of the Section 19 investigations, which colleagues have heard me say many times with other officers, we have to understand the flooding mechanism to be able to put the right fix in place, or at least bid for the money for the right fix. If we just jump to a conclusion, we'll get it wrong. So it's important we understand all of those flooding mechanisms, which is a key part of the Section 19. And Thunker Drain is quite complicated because there was effectively 3 different types of flooding mechanisms. But again, we are looking at it. No quick fix coming forward on the Waring or the Thunker Drain. What we have at the moment is the best you're going to get for a while.
Thank you. Just one question from me around, you're picking up on what you're saying in respect of the Waring attenuation scheme that wasn't successful in its application last time. If I'm right in thinking that's because it doesn't meet the criteria for granting aid funding. When it was considered previously, the granting aid, as I understand it, calculation for Horncastle, most of that granting aid funding available to Horncastle was taken to build the system on the Bain, which left an insufficient amount of granting aid available to meet the cost of a Waring scheme. I'm aware of a pumping station project elsewhere in Lincolnshire which is benefiting from being recounted for granting aid after 10 years instead of the usual 25, accounting that the previous works were insufficient to extend its lifetime. It did its job, but it weren't as good as was necessarily hoped. I'm just wondering whether there is a prospect with Horncastle to recount Horncastle after 10 years for granting aid assessment, and whether that would make a difference on closing the gap on funding the Waring scheme. And again, the reason I ask that is that we have a clear evidence of a further flood, obviously with the consequences and cause and effect that we're discussing, but we know that we can begin to evidence that the lower Bain system, both in Horncastle and further downstream, is under severe pressure with the amount of inflows coming into it, even with the Bain system functioning. And I just wonder on the back of that whether there is a sufficiently compelling argument to re-look at the time period on which we're able to count granting aid.
Short answer, Mr. Chairman, is no. The 10-year recalculation is not a normal rule. It's a very unique situation for some schemes. And in simple terms, flows, I know some of the residents don't believe us, but flows on the Bain do not generally impact on levels on the Waring and vice versa. So we have to look at where are the unique benefits from each reservoir. So benefits on the Waring reservoir would not really go very far back up the actual Bain itself. So they have to stand on their own legs.
I appreciate that the 10-year re-evaluation is for fairly unique circumstances. I'm just wondering how many times Horncastle has to flood in order for this to be a unique circumstance. Have we asked the question? Have we pursued this? Have we tried? Have we made the case? And who has turned us down? And who do we need to be raising this with, and at what level, to convince them that potentially Horncastle is worth re-evaluating after 10 years instead of the usual 25? And how I appreciate the argument you make in relation to the Waring not necessarily impacting further upstream on, for example, the Bain. My question and concern is downstream of the confluence of the Bain and the Waring, and the impact that that has right the way down, including the breaches that we saw at Tumby Swan and Coningsby Ings, and the flooding that we saw at Kirkby on Bain.
Yeah, thank you. The crux of it will be, and this will come out of the final conclusions and discussions with the GeoSmart report, is did Horncastle flood before the design standard of the reservoir that we put in? Because if it did, then we need to do something to try and bring that standard up to, or the level back up to the required standard. If it was an exceedance event, then we would just simply put it down as this flood was bigger than what the Horncastle scheme was designed for. So we wouldn't be able to reopen the economic case. But anything that every time we get new information, whether it be a GeoSmart report or whatever, we reassess, we rethink, and if there is a case there, then we will pursue it.
Thank you, and I'm sure colleagues will certainly keep this under assiduous review. I don't see anyone else indicating to speak on these items. Could I ask that the EA recommendation, responses to the recommendations are shared with this committee at the earliest opportunity? And obviously we do have an opportunity coming up on the 20th of January, which is our next meeting, to provide, to further scrutinise those responses when they come up. Notwithstanding that we are waiting on the Environment Agency to give its answers to the GeoSmart recommendations, I think I still think there is a degree of value, of considerable value, to the GeoSmart report and what it's asking. In effect, it is saying that on the balance of probabilities, the EA findings feel reasonable, but in order to be assured of that, then further information and clarification is being sought. So pending that clarification and information from the Environment Agency, and not seeing anyone else wishing to come in on any of these items, I think we can take the Section 19 and the update that Matthew has given us as noted, and I would just like to move that the committee, in respect to the findings of the assessment of the Environment Agency's Horncastle Reservoir Asset Performance Review supplied by GeoSmart, are accepted and supported, and that we await the Environment Agency's responses to the recommendations in due course, and we'll scrutinise those when we get them. If I'm able to move that and look for a seconder, please, Councillor Skinner. Just show hands. Thank you. Any against? Abstentions? One abstention. Thank you. Thank you for that, colleagues. That was an incredibly in-depth and an extensive debate, which is what we've come to expect of this committee. It takes us on helpfully to item 6, which is the Environment Agency update, our regular item, and we've got Morgan Ray and John Ray to take us through their item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to pick up 2 or 3 points from the previous items. So, Councillor Fleetwood, I'm very glad that you've sort of come across our flood awareness week this week. That's the intention of it, and it's to promote things like looking at people's flood risk. So people should really understand their flood risk, and we would like people to check online to see if they're at flood risk. There's up to 250,000 properties at flood risk in Lincolnshire, so it's important that we get this sort of message far and wide. There will always be flood events that exceed the capacity of the watercourses and of the flood defences and drainage networks, and so people need to know what to do in the case of flooding. So it's all about preparing a flood plan, signing up to our flood warnings, and general preparedness. Councillor Reid and Councillor Baxter talked at length about Gretford, and mentioned some desilting of the channel there. So I do have some information about that. That is being looked at. I can't give a precise answer to it, but it is definitely it's certainly being looked at by our teams. With the intention that if it is a possibility, our own workforce would carry out that operation. But it's important that we understand whether that will have an impact, as we've discussed previously in this committee, that maintenance funds are a challenge, and we have to make sure that all of our work does have a demonstrable impact on the ground, and that it will we can demonstrate that it will have an impact in reducing the risk of flooding. In terms of Great Steeping, Councillor Bowkett, yes, there was some flooding last week. Myself and Councillor Bowkett were in regular sort of communication at the time, and subsequent to that we have sent a team out there to do some investigations. I think they were out at the time to get as good information as we can, sort of that first-hand information, get that sort of evidence together. And we'll be taking that forward from there. Obviously, we'll be supplying that information to Matthew in terms of Section 19 reports as well. So, yeah, that is ongoing. So I'll come on to my presentation now. Thanks, Jess. Give Jess a... While that's happening, does anybody... would you want to take any questions on any of those items, first of all?
I mean, just picking up on your comment on the Grateford Cut, I'm incredibly grateful that that's being looked at. All I can say is that looking at Google Street View on my screen here and on Google Earth, I think we can look at it as intensely as we like. I think it's fairly clear, having stood on the bridge there near the sluice and looked at it, there is a considerable amount of silt and growth in that section of channel just downstream of the sluice gates, which in any way of recognising this has to be a restriction on the amount of water that can get down the Grateford Cut when those sluice gates are open, and moreover is taking up room which could otherwise be used for water storage in that channel, again, when those gates are opened. I mean, just looking at the shape and the design and the nature of that channel in that section immediately downstream of the sluice gates, it clearly is designed to convey water as quickly as it can from the West Glen down to the Welland, and also provide a storage, between its banks. It's quite a considerable amount of storage compared to the dimensions of the West Glen as it meanders its way through Grateford. And I just come back to the point that we've already made, that when the Grateford Cut was dug, I think in 1954, that was pretty short order after the floods that had taken place immediately before it. I just wonder how many years we've got to wait just to do a bit of desilting, given that our ancestors managed to dig a 7-mile relief channel and put a sluice gate in about 5 years.
Thank you. We'll continue to liaise closely with the community. I believe there's already been a meeting with the MP and members of the community, and I think another meeting with the community is planned. So we'll be keeping them updated on progress as far as that's concerned.
Thank you. Hopefully we can move from meetings to getting a digger on site. Councillor Fleetwood.
I may be jumping the gun a little here, but I'm always enthusiastic. In my previous question to Mr Harrison at County Council, I alluded to what is the future, and I talked in terms of pumps that are currently on loan from the Environment Agency to the drainage boards with regard to any potential flooding. They're currently dealing with the past flooding, but indeed if we do see future flooding in other parts of the UK, the EA can easily deploy some of those pumps. So what is the EA's potential resource for this area currently and for the future? Just going back to the previous question.
No, that's fine. So we do have a large stock, and I can clarify the actual numbers of mobile pumps which are centrally held, and different areas, different parts of the Environment Agency can call those in on mutual aid as and when is needed. But you do highlight a good point in that in the event of a countrywide scenario, there would be a pull on those stocks, and that would be obviously distributed on a sort of a priority basis. So yes, you know, there are a large number of stocks which are centrally held. We can move those around the country. We move those and specialist pump teams around the country to help set those up. We have different size of pumps. We've got sort of the mobile ones you can sort of put on the back of the trailer, and we also have a stock of the high volume pumps, the type that sort of came to Wainfleet a few years ago, which can shift vast volumes of water. So, but yeah, there is only a finite supply of those, and obviously we'll have to prioritise that carefully.
So if I can come back, what Lincolnshire should do then is to padlock them into various compounds and to hold them as resources for negotiation for future.
Well, we do have our own stock of pumps within Lincolnshire as well, but
Thank you. Councillor Skinner, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll just picking up a little bit of an observation. With many of our parish councils refreshing their emergency plans, the flood plan that you mentioned, how is that cascaded down? Because obviously it needs to be incorporated, doesn't it?
So in terms of the
physical on-the-ground plans,
right? Okay.
And how it interacts with your physical on-the-ground plans. Thank you.
Yeah. So we do liaise closely with our professional partners, and as part of sort of preparing for this year's sort of winter readiness sort of programme, we have updated some of the sort of contingency plans, you know, where mobile pumping might be an option. So that's ongoing work, where we sort of carry out that sort of planning work. But again, as far as the sort of I suppose that's kind of preparing, for instance, that sort of incident awareness week, flood awareness week. Again, you know, we would urge not just homeowners, but also we've seen some really sort of successful community plans put in place. I was involved with the flooding of Northamptonshire 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we saw some very effective work by one of the local communities who had a flood plan locally as part of their emergency plan, and it involved flood wardens checking on people and helping with sort of potential help for vulnerable people. So I would encourage all communities to engage with that process.
Thank you very much. But what I was getting to is sharing best practice and cascading that information down. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Ashley Morris.
Many thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure I can say with a degree of confidence I share the frustration of so many in this chamber. We hear so many buzzwords and so many cliches and phrases. What I would genuinely like to know, and I was horrified having visited Grateford, and I say Grateford, I'm sure it's Gretford, twice, and seen the devastation there was there when a simple operation, I mean, we were told that a third of the Grateford Cup was due to be hoiked out, and so it would be usable. Well, a third of it is 2/3 light. say it's a day late and a dollar short, it's putting it mildly. I really find this frustrating, and I'm sure you can gather that. We've been there. There are beautiful houses that have been wrecked. And maybe if the Grateford Cut had been maintained, I mean, we looked at it, it looked like a field. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I'd do a better job on the riparian drain at the side of my property. And that's me, never mind a digger. I mean, really, those people want to know when it's going to happen and that it's going to be effective. I mean, that's one small area, and I know everyone's got their own favourite area. Where I live, actually, near Boston, didn't flood. We were very lucky, and we can see the River Witham from the upstairs windows. I mean, this is really not good enough. It doesn't, the public have no confidence. Personally, I have no confidence. We need to know that someone's actually going to go and do that. I mean, what on earth, who on earth thought a third of a relief channel was going to be any use? I mean, as far as I can see, that's going to create a lake. I mean, that was mentioned at the parish meeting that I attended with colleagues, because we just felt they needed some support, something. But I mean, they may have had, if that had been hoiked out, they'd probably have had 6 inches of water, which isn't brilliant, but it wouldn't have been up to the worktop and floating off with the air fryer. Okay, I'm sorry, that's a wee rant, but I mean, I felt it appropriate. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think if anybody wants to know just what the Grateford Cut looks like, I don't know if you can see my screen, but when Councillor Ashley Morris refers to a field, she isn't joking. I don't have anybody else speaking, so I take the opportunity, Morgan, to answer Councillor Ashley Morris and crack on with your report.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so the first slide then, please, Jess, next one, sorry. So as Councillor Davey mentioned, it's been an incredibly wet year. Just go on to that slide. So this is the area that we cover, largely Lincolnshire and Northamptonshire. And as Councillor Davey said, we've seen extremely wet year and a wet last month. So we've seen up to 170, between 173% and 346% of the long-term average over that time, mostly held up by the rainfall over last winter, and then sort of topped up over the last month or so. As we say, it's the wettest year since 1882, and more or less over 150% of the long-term average for the year. So September was the sort of the second wettest since 1871. So we can see how that's impacted the whole of the area over the last 12 months or so. If we can go on to the next one, please, Jess. So I wanted to sort of cover the recovery work, and it's been a major sort of undertaking post Storm Henk and Babette around the recovery. So we had around about 54 damaged assets caused by those winter storms, with the various sort of scale of impact from sort of minor damage up to sort of 13 breaches, as Councillor Bowkett discussed earlier. We built a recovery programme with an estimated cost around about £45 million across the area. The Environment Agency nationally put aside £36 million to cover that cost. We didn't receive any additional funding into the Environment Agency to cover the cost, so we had to cover that with rearranging different priorities. But we received £15 million within this area for our recovery programme. If you want to move on to the next one. So we have completed a number of repairs and a number of ongoing. So we've completed repair works to the sort of the left bank of the Maxi Cut near Tallington, both banks of the Barling Zone near Short Ferry in Lincoln, and the Borno and the River Bain as well. The picture you can see there is one of the repairs to the Barling Zone bank. So it's quite in-depth sort of engineering. It's a lot of engineering to organise, contracts to put in place, designs to be put in place. And we received the bulk of that money starting in this financial year and to be spent this financial year. Do you want to go to the next one, please, Jess? So certainly ongoing and planned repairs. So we started work in September to prepare the 2 banks on the River Witham near Fiskerton. So the picture there is one of those slips. So since that time, we've had, I suppose, a more bespoke sort of flood warning put in place for that, and contingency planning to monitor that situation. We estimate that's going to take around about three months to complete, so that work's underway at the moment. There's 15 more assets we're planning to repair before April 2025, which is the sort of the funding deadline that we've got at the moment. These are the ones that present the lower risk of these assets. If we move on to the next one, please. So I normally give an update on our sort of capital scheme progress. I'll run around those sort of clockwise, starting in the top left. So this is part of a national screen. What you can see there is a debris screen. You'll know, particularly in urban environments, that debris schemes mostly appear before culverts or bridges, and they're very important. They filter out, if you like, some of the larger debris. It's far better that we can catch debris upstream of culverts before they go in and block the culvert from within. We've got 63 screens within our area as requiring investigation and potential improvement at a cost of around about £11 million. So that'd be an ongoing programme up to 2028. And we estimate there's going to be around about 188 properties better protected as a result of this work. The screens need to be replaced both for a sort of efficiency to sort of allow more water through, ease of clearing, and make sure they correspond to the latest guidelines. The next picture to the right of that is the River Slee in Sleaford. So as I've mentioned before, this is a project to replace some existing structures through Sleaford. There's a number of structures which have been in there some years. They require a lot of operation and maintenance. So we're looking to put in a system which is more passive, that doesn't require so much maintenance and operation, which will allow our staff to be freed up for other work, and also will be more efficient in the long term. So in July we had a workshop with key organisations, including North Kesteven District Council and other risk management authorities, to develop our understanding more of what other people want for the community as well. Obviously, the river through Sleaford is a big asset to the community, and we want to make sure all views are taken into account. We're undertaking modelling at the moment, and that will help to support the sort of the preferred option going forward. We're hoping to produce the sort of the business case over the next 2 or 3 months. The approximate costs, we think it's going to be around about £6 million, and we think it will help to protect around about 323 properties. The next one on the right is the Maxi Cut, which was we've already previously mentioned, but it's constructed in the 1950s to divert the majority of flows from the River Welland, bypassing Market Deeping and reducing flood risk to the town. So we've got a large project there looking at improving the embankments in that area. The optioneering will take place over the next few months, again to sort of aid the refinement of the business case there, and produce that business case in next spring. So we're looking at a potential £10 million investment there, which will have a benefit to around about 680 properties in the vicinity. The next picture, actually in the bottom left, is I suppose the sea bank, if you like, or the tidal embankment between Gibraltar Point and Freeston Shore, so between Skegness and Boston, effectively. So we've identified some sort of low spots, cattle poaching, burrowing animals, that sort of thing within that stretch of the embankment. We're currently working on the business case there to make those improvements. And we think that's going to cost around about £7 million, and hopefully it will be in place by March 2027, the completed scheme. As well as the periphery of sort of Boston, we estimate that there's around about 1,600 properties which will have a better standard of protection once this is complete. The next one along to the right is Wainfleet. And we're working on a scheme there to improve the resilience of the raised defences in the vicinity of Wainfleet. So the members will be aware that the breach happened on one of those raised defences a few years ago, which resulted in the evacuation of a considerable number of residents from the town and from the outlying areas. So again, that would be a nearly £6 million investment by November 2027. So the bottom right is of the Boston Barrier. So the Boston Barrier has actually worked a number of times since its completion. Just a few weeks ago, we operated it on a high tide. It has been closed in September this year for a sort of 4-day outage to do some sort of planned maintenance work. But again, it's operating well. However, there are still some more works to be done around the port, around the wet dock there. So preliminary works for those wet dock entrance is underway. And the latest construction programme anticipates that the scheme as a whole will be complete in 2027. We also met with Lincolnshire County Council to talk about the reinstigation of the footpath, which I know some members are quite keen to get resolved soon, so on the opposite side to the wet dock. So we're hoping to progress that shortly. I've gone to the next slide. So a large scheme which we're progressing at the moment is around the Lower Witham. So the first, in two parts really. The first part is a refurbishment of the Grand Sluice, which is sort of the bottom left there. So this structure is a listed structure. It's over 200 years old. So there's complexities around working in and around a listed structure, which is in constant operation as well. So we're looking at, we've done some sort of dive surveys, the more intrusive surveys, putting together the designs for that over the next few months. And again, you know, we're putting in place a work programme that caters for the fact that it's an operational structure over a number of years, so we can keep the flow going through there, and that will be undertaken over the next few years. The embankments works alongside this is looking at our sort of critical embankments within the Lower Witham. They'll be prioritised on the basis of their condition and with the number of properties that they protect as well. So we're working through those at the moment. Again, hopefully we'll be starting on that over the next year or so. Again, completion by 2028 would be quite a long programme going forward. Go on to the next slide. So we're also working, just talk briefly about the Fens 2100. So this is a recognition that the sort of the Fens landscape, the lowland areas, are a unique landscape, and it's not just unique to Lincolnshire, it's unique right across the Fenland landscape into Cambridgeshire and beyond. And you know, some of the sort of the figures sort of stand out there. Sort of nearly 400,000 people live in the Fens. There's approximately 3,700 farms. There are 318 pumping stations managed by all the different authorities there. So what we're doing there is we're making sure that you know, we've got all the evidence in place to make sure that future investment is considered appropriately. So we're producing baseline reports which will be complete next year. So this is taking all those catchments in turn, looking at what assets are in those areas and the investment that's needed on each of those assets, and that will help to inform our investment programmes from 2027 onwards. We go on to the next slide, please, Jess. And finally, I just wanted to recap on Flood Action Week, which I've spelled wrong. it's really just a reminder of the different sort of flood warning codes. You know, as advocates for the flood warning system, it's important that we all understand that what those codes mean. So flood alerts, prepare, sort of have a bag ready, include medical and insurance documents and any other important items that you might need if you're leaving your home because of flooding. Act, so this is where we expect flooding to happen, so this is where we issue a flood warning. So do things like turn off utilities such as gas and water, and move things to safety. And a severe flood warning in the very extreme circumstances, follow advice from the emergency services is the important thing to remember there. And if you're flooded, call 999 if you're in immediate danger. So they're the three sets of warnings that we issue, and it's important that people know the difference between them. I'll leave it there, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you. We have Councillor Baxter first, then Councillor Ashley Morris, then... Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. On the slide that's marked completed emergency projects, do you mean that the emergency project has been completed or the project has been completed? I ask because I've had a specific question about Tallington where a bank of the Welland has been repaired, but it's been repaired with polythene sheets and ballast, I guess you'd call it, sandbags. That's not a permanent repair. Villagers are worried that it's going to last out the winter. Is it going to be fixed properly, and if so, when? And I guess you could say that for all the emergency repairs. So emergency repairs that will get us through one winter are welcome, better than nothing, but when is it going to be fixed properly? Which kind of goes on to the next question. You've given us a nice long list of works that have been done or are being done. Which projects didn't make the cut? The Gretford cut, for example. Which projects have been assessed as? Where would I find a list of the projects which were kind of desirable but not essential and therefore aren't going to happen? So yeah, such as the other 2/3 of the Gretford cut that Councillor Ashley Morris was talking about. And then thirdly, on the Fen 2100 project, I welcome the project. Does the Environment Agency have an opinion on solar PV projects and wind projects in the Fenland landscape? Thank you.
Okay, so so on the list of projects that we've not taken forward, so I presume you mean as a result of the winter storms last year, or in general. But in terms of last year's winter storm, I can provide you with a list of projects that we identified and projects which we've completed and ones which we were not able to take forward. But I'm happy to take that on as an action. Solar and wind farms, we take those on a case-by-case basis. So as part of the planning process, we're consulted, and we will obviously respond to a planning request as we would for any other plan. I don't know if you want to mention anything.
Yeah, I'll just touch on that. So, yeah, as Morgan said, any of those sites, we just assess each one on its merits, and each one we will assess from a flood risk point of view and a flood risk point of view solely. So if a solar farm came forward, and we're getting quite a lot of them, provided they're not within 9 metres of one of our assets and therefore don't impact on our access for maintenance or to access any site, we will ask the developers to do a flood risk assessment, which they have to do by law anyway, to show the impact of their development on any flood water that would have gone on their site in case if there's a breach of a defence or whatever. So are they displacing flood water somewhere else? And also, what is the impact of flood water to their site? The footprint and the volume of these of solar farms and wind farms is relatively small, so they very rarely have an impact on a third party. They very rarely displace flood water, and provided solar farm can be raised above floodwater, or they're happy for it to be flooded out and their critical infrastructure is raised above a predicted flood level, then we don't have an objection. We don't object in principle to them. As the Environment Agency, we look at it purely from a flood risk point of view on a case-by-case basis.
Chair, just on the Tallington emergency repairs. So we did carry out some emergency repairs at the time. There was potential for some property to be flooded, as well as the East Coast main line. So some repairs were affected on the Maxi Cut when that was first identified last winter. So I'm not sure if that's the location you're referring to, but as with that location, and indeed a number of other locations, so emergency repairs were carried out. We will be returning to those as priorities. Like I will get back to you when that will be for Tallington. But as I think Councillor Bowkett mentioned as well that we have several locations where we've had to sheet the embankments as an emergency repair, and then we will get onto those as well, they've been stabilised, but we will get onto a sort of full repairs as priorities and finance dictates.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley Morris, please.
Many thanks, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if you could shed some light on the delay on the Boston Docks flood improvement, because obviously the flood in Boston, when it did happen, was catastrophic for a huge amount of properties. And I mean, what risk do you actually perceive there is at the moment? I mean, there has been quite a considerable delay on that.
Just to be clear, the current standard of protection in Boston is at the required standard. So the Boston Combined Strategy aims to reduce the risk to Boston down to 1 in 300 in any year, 1 in 300 chance of flooding over the next 100 years. The barrier and the banks that are there now and the walls that are there now provide that standard today. The works we're doing at the port are effectively, they're like the climate change element of it. When we built the barrier, obviously we built it up high because you can't come back and add a bit more onto it in 50 years. That sort of side route through the docks, that's a flood route that in a very extreme one, again above our current design standard for today, or that design standard in many years to come, and that's effectively closing that back door off. That's what the works at the dock are doing. So it isn't needed for today for Boston to have the required standard today. We'd like to get it done at the same time for lots of reasons, and there are lots of very many complex commercial construction and contractual reasons it's been delayed, but we are getting it done as quick as we can. But it doesn't reduce the standard in Boston below. There's one thing we're constantly assessing is if another December 13 flood level surge came through, what would happen in Boston? And we are confident if that same tide hit again this December, we would not have the problems in Boston.
Okay, thank you very much for that. But there has been, again, with a lot of these things, quite a considerable delay. I mean, we did a trip Saturday morning on the boat out to look at the various aspects of it, a huge amount of which, I mean, this is my own personal opinion, could be improved by dredging, but we appreciate that there's reasons that can't happen or reasons that doesn't happen. But if that's a confident view, that's, for the first time this morning, slightly reassuring. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughan, please. Then Haig, Middleton, Clark and Briggs.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Morgan. It's a question I asked was going back in June, but apparently because of the general election he didn't attend. After the 15 breaches on your main rivers, how many has been repaired? And because of those breaches, we've had loads of trouble on our pumping stations. I remember IDD drainage boards, considerable cost to the drainage boards. And the last question is, why Tumbley? Why are you not repairing Tumbley breaches? Is it Tumbley, the breach? Why aren't you repairing that?
So carried out around about 5 repairs so far. So, and some of the breaches have been repaired by third parties as well. So yeah, it's an ongoing ongoing work there. So do you say Tom? Yeah.
The reason we haven't repaired the Tumby breach and that the landowner has done it, it goes back to the complexity of all of these things. We don't have a legal duty to repair breaches. The Environment Agency doesn't, and it all normally rests with the riparian landowners. Obviously, we will do them where we can and where funding allows. One of the slides Morgan had up at the start is we'd estimated £45 million for our repair bill for last winter. Of that, we were given 15, so we had a £30 million shortfall. As always, we have to prioritise, and it's an issue I'm sure the committee's talked about in the past. We have to prioritise effectively on chimney pots, count the houses, and in a rural location like Lincolnshire, it becomes tricky. So the bottom line was for the aggregate company to wait for it to rise to the top of the EA prioritised list where we had the funding to do it, and it stacked up against everything else was going on, would have been a very, very long wait. So it was cheaper for them commercially to carry out their riparian responsibilities and just fix it themselves, because it was cheaper and enabled them to get their site up and running quicker. Like I say, bottom line is we don't have to repair every breach. We'd like to, but we do it within the resources that we have available. And when we have a £30 million shortfall, we have to prioritise. That one was at the bottom of the list, so the landowner said, I'll do it myself.
Just one more question, Chair. I perhaps didn't ask the question properly. Are you reimbursing the drainage boards for the pumping stations?
So there was a national £75 million, which was announced by the previous government. Mr. Bateson will answer that more fully, but there was a mechanism there for IDBs to bid into 2 different tranches. One was for the costs associated with the flooding, and the other tranche was for sort of repair and renewal of assets. But Peter will cover that more thoroughly.
Thank you. Just a couple of points I'd like to pick on while we're mentioning the breach at Tunbridge Swan, appreciating that in my own county division, and privileged to have a ride past there with the Witham Third Drainage Board on their tour of inspection a couple of weeks ago. First of all, fully appreciating the challenges that the agency has in terms of funding, how much would you estimate, or would the agency estimate it would cost the agency to repair the Tunbridge Swan breach if you were to do it?
I'm sure that figure's been looked at. I don't have it to hand at the moment, but I can find that for you potentially by the end of the meeting.
Thank you. I'd be grateful for that. I understand Aggregate Industries are quoting that they estimate that it will cost them about £500,000 to do this work, which does seem a relatively small amount of money compared to the amount which the agency spent a little bit further downstream at Coningsby Ings. And I'm just wondering whether we need to look a little bit more closely at how a private sector operator can effect this kind of repair at that kind of price, rather than into the millions of pounds, which some of our other breaches are costing to be repaired. I just wonder if we were able to take the similar approach for Aggregate Industries, whether we get more holes in rivers plugged in a more timely fashion, and for better value for taxpayer money into the bargain. I'd also just like to pick up on, again, we seem to be incredibly lucky at this location that we have got a landowner or a operator adjacent in whose commercial interest it is to spend £500,000 of their own money to repair a breach in the Environment Agency's river in order for them to be able to carry on doing the work that they need to do. And I'm incredibly grateful to the local member that we have got aggregate industries prepared to do that. And I know that the local town council at Coningsby gave aggregate industries an award to appreciate the work that they have done for the local community in the aftermath of Babette and indeed in the aftermath of Henk. And I would just draw attention that my understanding is that if the Environment Agency were to take the decision not to repair a breach because it has no legal duty to do so, I would just draw attention that certainly in the case of this breach, the River Bain is currently making its own arrangements through a couple of farmers' fields and a Witham Third drainage channel and following its old course downstream. Where are we legally, or where is the agency legally, if it were to take such a decision not to repair a breach, but by effect it is changing the course of a main river? And my understanding is that if the agency or anyone else was to seek to change the course of a main river, then that would require its own consultation process. Would the agency agree that it would need to carry out this consultation process before changing the course of a main river, and that by choosing not to repair a breach in a river, it is in effect changing the course that it's taking?
The short answer is yes, we would have to do that consultation. Thankfully, we haven't got to that situation yet where we don't fix a breach on a main river, and it would be a legal minefield, I must admit. It's not one I can give an easy answer to, and I'm sure there'll be lawyers fighting over it a long time. But let's hope we don't get to that situation. Do you want me to give the price?
So you asked about how much was our estimate for the work at Tunby Swan. It was £5 million. There's one house at risk of flooding there, and obviously the road there.
Thank you. Well, I think surely the agency needs to reflect very heavily on how it gets to a price of 5 million and a private operator gets to a price of 500,000. I appreciate that there is all sorts of due diligence that as public sector organisations, our procurement, be it a county council, a district council, the agency, is always going to be more constrained than it is in the private sector. But going from £500,000 to 5 million perhaps suggests that there is a massive gulf, perhaps a gulf as big as the breach in the River Bain, between value for money and what is able to be achieved on that in that form. I mean, that is such a vast difference in price that it really does, I think, need a great deal of investigation as to how the Environment Agency is arriving at some of these quotes, because it does mean, surely to goodness, it genuinely means that on those kind of figures, an awful lot of stuff isn't going to get done because simply there isn't the money to do it. But appreciating there are other speakers. So Councillor Hayes, then Middleton, please.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question follows along a similar line. Will all the breaches of the main water courses and all overtopping, I'm getting the feeling that they're not all down for repairs. So what you've been careful to avoid so far is giving us a list of any that won't appear on the repair list. The second question I've got, going totally away from this, is regarding groundwater. Now, I think I'm right in thinking that the EA have various boreholes around the county for monitoring water levels. And this falls partly into Anglian Water's domain as well, is that over recent years, Anglian Water has tended to rely on fewer and fewer water sources. So some of the old ones have been shut down. Like Welton, I'm not sure whether Welton, Drove Lane at Sleaford, Bourne, Kirkby Laythorpe, whether they've been closed down. But I wonder if you've got any records that have shown that with Anglian Water not using local water boreholes, what the effect that has had on groundwater around Lincolnshire. And assuming that I'm correct in my thinking, that has made groundwater levels rise in certainly some areas, and there seems to be nothing in place to monitor and adjust those water courses. Farmers have, a lot of farmers have the right to water the crops from water courses and pay for licenses for those. And I wonder whether we're missing a trick from getting farmers to perhaps irrigate areas of land that they could do when it's not needed to alleviate some of the groundwater problems that we've had. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I take that one, if that's all right? I'll just cover this briefly. So as part of Project Groundwater, which is a multi-agency innovation project that Anglian Water, the County Council and the EA are all members of, we are exploring something called dynamic licensing, which is a changing of approach to how groundwater is looked at nationally, and along the lines of exactly what you've suggested, when there's too much of it, to allow more abstraction, so if that's water company, agricultural users, commercial users, etc., and when there's not enough of it, i.e. in the summer, to reduce the abstraction down. At the moment, the way groundwater is regulated is based on basically a set amount per day, per week, per month, per year. And it doesn't take into account the fluctuating levels that we do see in Lincolnshire of the extremes in winds from the extremes in summer, where we get, you know, very high levels in winter and quite low levels in the summer. So taking a dynamic approach does work, and it is something that the University of Lincoln, I believe, Matt, are taking forward as part of Project Groundwater. So it is being looked at. But on the flip side of that, the main purpose of how the Environment Agency look at groundwater is based on water resources, is based on water supply provision, to make sure there's enough of it and to make sure the aquifers are getting an appropriate amount of recharge. So you're trying to balance two very sensitive arguments in one point, but we are looking at dynamic licensing, and we do hope that if that does come into effect, it will make a substantial difference to agricultural users as well as ourselves and other commercial users of groundwater as well.
Can I go back to the first question then, Chairman? We're not being told of what areas are not going to be replaced on for breaching and overtopping.
Yeah, I committed earlier in the meeting to providing that list of projects that we're unable to take forward within that £15 million that we received for repairs and recovery work. As John mentioned, you know, we calculated that we needed £45 million across the area for recovery work. We received £15 million to be spent this year, which is what we're doing on the priority sites. We'll provide a list for those that weren't within that. Anything else, as it stands, will have to be prioritised in our normal maintenance programme. So prior to this last winter's storms, and on a continuing basis, we do have assets that do require maintenance and repair, generally speaking. What will happen is that these list of sort of damaged assets will be ranked alongside all those other assets, and we'll prioritise accordingly.
There's a tongue-in-cheek throwaway comment. If they use the same contractors as the gravel extractor at Tumby are using, they might be able to get all of the breaches repaired. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Middleton.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to go back to Boston Barrier, where you described there was a bit of planned maintenance being done. I think I'd describe it more as major repairs, because you were jackhammering concrete off to expose the iron bars in there that hold the structure together. I think you gunned off 15 millimetres. And your drawings and designs said you should have had 150 millimetre there. So there's no wonder that after only 4 years, you've got major construction problems with that barrier. And then we come back to your 1 in 300 chances of being flooded. Only about a month ago, when you had the barrier up, that tide, because of a southerly wind, finished up being a metre less than what you expected. But if that high tide had come a month later, where we just had northerly winds, I'm assured it would have gone over it would have overtopped the dock, gone through the dock, and flooded the Boston College and St Nicholas Church area very badly. So a lot of people in Boston see AE as not being fit for purpose, and it's these types of things that continually throw up that gives us no confidence. And that's why I'm going to ask you now, how much rain do you think we're going to get through this next winter? Are you forecasting a rainfall for this winter? And if we get considerable rainfall, is it just going to go back through these unrepaired breaches and flood the farmland again? Thank you, Chairman.
So in terms of rainfall forecasts, and we do have an outlook, obviously they get more accurate the closer you get to a flood event. So general sort of prediction from the Met Office are we're going to have a slightly more wetter than usual winter over the next few months. So on the sort of the balance of probabilities, it will be sort of wetter than the average. That's about as close a forecast as we can give at this stage. Obviously, as different weather fronts come in, we start monitoring the track of them and seeing where they go. We've got a flood forecasting centre down in Exeter, which is associated with the Met Office. They work very, very closely together to provide that kind of 5-day outlook, which we help to with our planning for incidents. So, but yes, I mean, not all of the defences will be fixed from last winter. As I said, you know, there was a shortfall in funding to be able to do that. If they haven't been fixed in time, then we're likely to see that areas of farmland flood again.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, then Briggs, then Beale, then Skinner, then Fleetwood.
Thanks, Chairman. Open question, really. With the worst rain downfall, what's the impact on building on floodplains? In the past, I brought this up and I've been told it's a district council matter, nothing to do with the authority. So is there a partnership, or is the district councils just totally ignoring the flood threat? Thank you, Chairman.
It's the same with, from an EA point of view, it's the same with solar farms and the other things. We assess every development on its merits, but you're right, the district councils or the city council or the borough council is the planning authority, and ultimately the decision sits with the planning authority. There are some developments that go on in the floodplain, depends on the type of floodplain, where it is. There are some developments we will object to, because that development will increase flood risk to others, as well as putting the development itself at risk. There are some developments that can be made safe when it comes to main river or sea flooding, but may have impacts on surface water or IDB drainage networks. So the partnership, we all correspond and we all comment on the same planning applications, and if necessary, we do get together. There's a monthly sort of drainage group that meets for each local authority, and we talk about the major planning applications. But at the end of the day, the decision, 99% of the time, the decision sits with the planning authority. And I say the 99% of the time, we referred to Thunker Drain earlier and the new developments or relatively recent developments around that side of Horncastle. My understanding is town council objected, district council refused the planning permission, but it was granted on appeal by Secretary of State. But so ultimately, even that local democratic will can be overturned. But 99% of the time, the final decision maker is the local authority. But I'm pleased to say that the vast majority of cases, I would like to say 100%, but I'm probably not going to say 100%, the vast majority of cases, certainly the views of the flood risk experts of the Environment Agency, the IDB, are taken into account in making that decision.
Councillor Briggs, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your completed repairs report. However, may I just ask, regarding Milldam Dyke in North Scarl, which suffered severe flooding, bank maintenance has been carried out and cosmetically it looks amazing. However, there's no desilting been carried out for at least 6 to 7 years. When can this be expected, as it's vital and still considered a flood risk? And secondly, there is an independent contractor that could carry out this work, fully experienced, with the adequate equipment and insurance. Could he help? And regarding the statement that the chairman made, possibly save money. Thank you.
Yeah, so Milldam Dyke is within our East Midlands area, not within our John and myself's operational boundary, but I have talked to the operations manager there, who informs me that the planned maintenance that was to be done in September was carried out, and hopefully that's what you're referring to, what it looks like there. With as far as sort of dredging the dyke or the desilting, I'll have to take that back to him to find out what their position is on that, but I'm sure they'd be pleased to also hear from you, if there is a potential for a contractor to carry out works on behalf of the community. But yeah, I can talk to you afterwards about providing those details.
Thank you very much for that response.
Thank you, Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Chair. First off, an observation. It's been mentioned earlier about solar arrays. I may have been out of school many, many decades, but my understanding of a farm is that it's land or buildings used for the growing of crops or rearing of animals. Solar arrays are not farms, so can we please stop referring to them as solar farms? In an earlier slide, Morgan referred to delays due to environmental concerns. By this, are we talking about Natural England wanting to protect badgers or the greater, lesser spotted cane toad, rather than protecting properties and farmland? Thank you.
So with all our work, we're governed, as in all of our authorities, by the Countryside and Wildlife Act, and we have to make sure that whatever we do complies with the law. And obviously protected species are very much, protected and by law. So if there are issues around protected species, we do have to put in place mitigation works to so that we are able to carry out the work, in the appropriate way. So I'm not sure of what the delays were for in this instance, but certainly we would have to consult with partners such as Natural England around sort of licenses to be able to carry out work.
Thank you. My understanding, if one looks at the breach on the Welland, that part of the delays after the discovery of asbestos was then that on the flooded land there were birds on there. Well, yes, because it was flooded. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one or two questions along similar lines. I mean, just picking up on, I think, what Councillor Beale was driving at. Am I right in understanding that the breaches in the Welland have now been closed in the Crowland Cubbit washes? And could you just advise me when those breaches were repaired, please?
Yeah, they've been completed. Obviously, sometime earlier this year. I'm not sure the exact date they were completed, but the information I have that those breaches have been closed.
Thank you. I haven't been able to keep monitoring as regularly as I would have liked to have done, but the impression that I got is that the repairs have been done quite late this summer on account of some enterprising sand martins having made their nests in the sheer walls of the breach. Sand martins obviously liking the soil and material that was left exposed when the water had gone through. I fully appreciate what you're saying about the requirements of the 1981 Wildlife Act, but I'm aware that under that legislation, it is possible in certain circumstances to disturb the nests of birds where certain criteria are met. One of those criteria is that crops are endangered. Given that for the best part of 6 or 7 months, there was a gaping hole in the River Welland, and we were hoping and praying that the rain that we saw at the end of September in the Welland Valley, got further upstream, including Leicestershire and Northamptonshire, that didn't come earlier in the year. Had it have done so, while we were waiting for the sand martins to move out, all of the water that the Environment Agency at vast public expense had evacuated out of the Crowland and Cubbit washes was at risk of coming straight back in through the gaping hole that remained. And the question for me is, were any permission sought to disturb those sand martins? Was that permission sought, was that permission declined by Natural England, or were Natural England even asked?
I don't know the answer to your question, but I can follow that up afterwards.
Thank you. I really think myself and the committee would like an answer to that, because we need to know where responsibility for some of this decision making is taken, given that that has been, or that was for a considerable period, a very real risk. And I want to know whether the Environment Agency was carrying that risk by not asking for those permissions, which the legislation clearly state exist, or whether the responsibility lies with Natural England for not taking the appropriate decisions in that circumstance. And I would like to hear from Natural England on a number of issues, but before we do, I would like to know if this was one of them. Because, as I say, we are, as a country, incredibly sensitive. And I'm sure all organisations rightfully are sensitive to their requirements under wildlife legislation, but there are elements of interpretation around that legislation, and we need to know what framework we're using for that interpretation. Councillor Skinner, then Fleetwood, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll just add a little bit more to that debate before I get on to my question. I was going to ask about the invasive species that haven't got passports to operate in our rivers, signal crayfish, various different mussels, and that absolute floating moneywort that's a green all over. They've not asked for Natural England support either, but I'll leave that with the EA. I think somebody ought to take responsibility for the absolute blight on our rivers. Right, I was going to try and end up positive with National Flood Week. I was going to hope that the flood alert sign up was going to be asked for again. And as an end of that, I was going to ask, what percentage of the population do we know have signed up for flood alerts? Thank you.
We're just trying to remember if we know the answer off the top of our heads, and we don't. There's two things. The short answer is the take-up of our flood warning service, the broader service, is nowhere near what we'd like it to be. In some places, there are some parts of the East Coast, and I'm going from memory now, the last time I saw some figures, it was something like 30 or 40% of the population along the main East Coast had only signed up. You know, relatively small percentages are signed up, excuse me, proactively signed up. So what we did a few years ago, where a house has got a telephone line, we could opt that house into the warning service. Excuse me. So the resident hadn't proactively signed up. They didn't know they were at risk, but we had opted. We had registered that property to the warning service if there was a landline. But over the last few years, there's been a decline in the number of properties with landlines. So as a percentage, it's still a relatively small percentage of properties are signed up either proactively or by us to the overall service. We have a relatively new system at our disposal, mass broadcasting, that we can do, but I think that's relatively restricted in terms of the scale of flood event. You know, if we had a major East Coast surge, we could use it. But the overall figures are generally quite small, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. I just thought we could all use the opportunity to actually give that some help and a bit of push throughout our patch. Thank you.
That would be much appreciated, thank you. The system John was referring to was the emergency alerts system, and that would be available to us if we were considering or had issued a severe flood warning. So it's of that kind of scenario.
Thank you. Councillor Fleetwood and then Councillor Ashley Morris.
Thank you, Chairman. As many people will know, both you and myself sit on the Regional Flood Defence Committee, and sometime back in the discussion, we were having the discussion about the cost of maintenance and the cost of things. And I think I should go on record that I think for the last X years, whenever we talk about budget, I always encourage Mark Bolt to sharpen his pencil, and it gets to a point of it being boring at those meetings when we talk about numbers and we look at some of the interesting figures that are presented to that committee, because I find them quite astounding. Just coming back to John Ray's comment there a few minutes ago, with regard to assets and the fact that the Environment Agency don't necessarily repair their own assets, I found that a little bit astounding, because then if you have a third party, if the EA aren't going to repair those assets, and it does fall to a third party, if a third party cannot afford to pay to repair those assets, well, then who does repair the assets? And then the follow-on issue from there, of course, is that if those assets are repaired by somebody other than the EA at whatever location, then the issue becomes an engineering topic as to if somebody is doing it, if they don't necessarily do it to the required standard with the required materials, and by chance that asset fails, then who becomes responsible? It becomes an absolute minefield and a problem. So either the EA accept responsibility for all of these issues, or they don't.
Just quickly come back on that. It is a legal minefield, and the word responsibility and accountability and all that sort of stuff is very, you have to be very careful how you use those things. Where there's an EA asset that we accept is that one that we either own or we maintain, we will always try and maintain that, and we do the best we can within the resources we've got. And as you've seen on the RFCC, our maintenance budgets are, you know, when we've got a maintenance budget, there's probably 25% of what we really want, and it doesn't go up with inflation. We do the best we can and things get prioritised. So when I say we don't always fix our own assets, or we don't always maintain our own assets, I accept they're not maintained as they used to be. They're maintained as best they can be with the funding that we have. If the riparian landowner wishes to maintain that asset, then fine. If they wish to repair that defence, then fine. But they will still be subject to the same due diligence and same from a scrutiny from law in terms of who's responsible. You know, if somebody did something that was negligent, they would be liable. Which is part of the reason why if somebody wants to do something, they still need to get a permit from us to do it. So we can check that they're not doing something negligent. But ultimately, we do what we can with the funding we've got. And most of the problems we've talked about today come down to we don't have the funding we need, and nowhere near it.
I think it should also go on record that we recently had a budget meeting, and I did propose that we went in for a higher level percentage of budget to assist the Environment Agency carrying out work. But again, this was either downvoted or the funding didn't come from the central pot.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley Morris.
Thank you very much. This is actually back to the previous question over here. How do people know that they should register for a flood alert on their phone? I mean, how do you publicise that? Because one of the issues that was raised on the Storm Impact Committee very much was the communication and lack of knowledge and lack of information that came out about who to ask about what. So I appreciate that's useful if people want have a landline, which obviously a huge amount of people still do. But how was that publicised? I mean, how do people know? I don't think anyone knows in the village I live in at all that that's a possibility.
So we do try and carry out some engagement exercises to encourage people to sign up, but obviously we cover a very, very large patch, so we rely on things such as the flood week that we're currently doing at the moment. But what we would encourage people to do is to go onto our website, or they can phone our floodline number, which I can give you afterwards, and there's obviously operators that have access to the same systems. And if they can give their sort of postcode or their house address, and they will sort of cross-check that with our flood maps. If they're at risk from flooding, then we can give information about how they can register themselves for the relevant flood warnings. I don't know if you want to say any more, John.
Just to be clear, when I mentioned earlier about landlines, that you can register a mobile number, and the majority of people that are registered now are registered on mobiles. And it does come down to, a lot of it is actually self-help. People need to be aware themselves and think and then, rightly or wrongly, it is quite often it is reverting to a website to check something. There is a lot of information on the government website, on the EA section of .gov.uk. There's information available you can get via county council websites, and it is a relatively simple and free service to sign up to.
Thank you. Do I see anybody else wishing? Councillor Bunny.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, on the flood warning alerts, am I right in saying that they're basically done on groundwater and river flooding and not so much for surface water, which does then cause confusion, or certainly did 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, correct. The Environment Agency, we currently only offer a flood warning service for sea, river, or groundwater flooding, and groundwater's in a few places where it's known to happen. For a number of reasons, we don't offer currently, I think there's some high-level political aspirations to try and offer a flood warning for surface water. What I would say from a personal point of view, trying to offer a flood warning for a surface water is going to be very, very, very challenging, and you are 9 times out of 10 you're going to miss the flooding because it is normally so localised.
Yeah, if just quickly come back, I appreciate that. But in areas, times when there are surface water flooding and people have suffered from that, they are advised to sign up for flood alert systems. The problem is that they won't always get on if they're river and so on, and so you get a negative feeling coming from your community. And I certainly have had to work within my area explaining the difference between fluvial flooding, surface water flooding and so on, and I think there's a lot of ignorance out there. Yet the scheme is go out to help yourself, get these flood alerts, but we can't get them because we're in the wrong postcode. And when you've got water outside your house, that doesn't always go down too well.
Yeah, we'll take that away. Certainly when you get through to our call centre, if you're in an area that's just at risk from surface water flooding and not at risk from rivers, they should not be offering people to sign up. So we'll take that back to make sure that is reiterated.
I believe it's also third-party groups which do that as well.
I would say that it's worth looking at things like the Met Office severe flood warnings, which cover a much wider area. The issue we have with issuing flood warnings and flood alerts is that you know, we end up with the sort of the cry wolf scenario if we don't consider sort of the accuracy of them. In that, you know, we can issue so many flood warnings, and if sort of the flood doesn't materialise, people will cease sort of take notice of them. So we do quite a lot of work once we've issued a flood warning to kind of validate that flood warning, to see what the impacts were actually on the ground, and can we fine tune it at all. But certainly, you know, I would say for sort of surface water issues, I would really encourage people to sort of sign up to any sort of alerts you can get as far as sort of severe weather warnings are concerned, and just to remain vigilant over that time.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further speakers. I've just got a couple of bits to pick up myself, and I've got Councillor Davey wishes to join in just a moment. From me, first of all, I was equally privileged as Councillor Ashley Morris and others to join the navigation down the Witham a couple of days ago, down the Haven. I would just, there are questions around it. I would appreciate some data so that I know in my mind where things are at, and I think we can give the reassurances where they're needed. In picking up on your report, including the Grand Sluice and the refurbishment that's going to take place there, could we possibly have, or could I possibly have sight of the capacity figures in the QMAC capacity figures for Grand Sluice, including the 3 main sluice gates and also the discharge capacity of the navigation lock? I appreciate we're looking to use the navigation lock as discharge capacity whilst each of the main gates are due to be refurbished. And so I'm assuming we must have the modelling, we must have the data that tells us precisely how many QMEX each one of those gates is capable of discharging. I would also appreciate understanding the discharge capacity through the existing Boston barrier, as I believe there are questions raised around whether it is or isn't able to get all of the water that needed through it. And obviously, having watched the water flow, I can't see any evidence of it being backed up. Colleagues on Black Sluice have had no difficulty discharging the South 40-foot upstream of the barrier, which the feeling would be, if the barrier is restricting flows in any way, then it would restrict it in such a way that it would affect the discharge of the South 40-foot. But I would just, for my own peace of mind and for answering the questions of river users and members of the public that are also posing these questions, it would be useful to have, as I say, the capacity of the Grand Sluice and the capacity of the Boston barrier, and just to compare those figures. And also, for that matter, any restrictions at other points down the Haven, if we assuming that the profile of that of the Haven is well known and well understood, if there are any points between the Grand Sluice and the barrier which equally have a restriction on the amount of water that can go down there. Again, having stood on the town bridge when the gates are open, there doesn't appear to be anything holding anything back, but it's just I'm asking these questions in a way as to hopefully provide, you know, your answers will, if they can reassure me, they may reassure others that are posing these questions.
Thank you. Yeah, a set of questions we were asked by, well, it was about February or March, maybe April, so it was about 4 ministers ago probably. So we stood on the Haven Bank with ministers and the new management team from the National Farmers Union to go through this. What we'll do is we'll prepare a very simple half-page bullet point briefing for you. What I can say with complete certainty and confidence is the Boston Barrier does not impede on flows out of the Witham or out of the South 40-foot catchment. The restriction in the system is Grand Sluice. Now, when we say that is the pinch point, there's no further pinch point downstream of Grand Sluice that impacts on river flows. There's no pinch point upstream of Grand Sluice until you get back into Lincoln that impacts on flows. Grand Sluice is the pinch point. The capacity of the 3 sluices, I'm trying to remember what the one, including the lock, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the capacity of the 3 sluices is around about 210 cumecs from memory. I'll clarify that when I get the actual figure. Peak flood flow in the lower Witham is about 155, 160. So the 3 sluices themselves have more than enough capacity to discharge when the tide is low enough for them to discharge. And obviously when the tide is high, the 3 sluice gates close and the lower Witham becomes a big storage bathtub and it all backs up. And that's one of the key things that we're now looking at in the new future plans for the Fens and the lower Witham, is not just how do we get a big flow through there, a one-off big flood, but it's as the climate is changing, we're getting successive flows coming after each other where we've not had time to drain the system down before. It's that cumulative impact. But being brutally honest, we're not looking at a scheme, and I don't think we ever will look at a scheme of raising those banks significantly. We're looking at where will we find more storage for water, because that's what it's about, storing water until the tide turns.
Thank you, and I'm genuinely grateful for that reassurance. And if you could share with the committee that briefing paper, members here have got it available should they get those kind of questions in the future. So, just appreciating the 210 cubic capacity of the existing 3 sluice gates, and having seen the width of the navigation lock, that navigation lock does have the potential to significantly increase your throughput once it's had that work done so that you can use it while each of the gates is offline. Do you foresee being able to get a greater volume of water at lower states of the tide if you're able to use all four doors in effect to discharge water while you have the opportunity, effectively giving more room for storage in the lower Witham system if you're able to get more out at lower tides? Is that where you're thinking this probably ends up longer term once you've got the 3 gates and the lock?
Potentially, yes. That's what we're investigating at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we've been aiming at ending on a positive note and genuinely massively increasing the discharge capacity of the Grand Sluice potentially has massive benefits, not just for the lower Witham down towards Boston, but the whole lower Witham system upstream to Lincoln. So thank you genuinely for that. Councillor Davey, I very much appreciate you've been waiting patiently online, but if you'd like to come in now, we'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman, and I've listened intently to the last nearly 3 hours of debate on these matters. Firstly, I would say that government is always very good, no matter which colour of government we have, at giving instructions to people and giving responsibilities to agencies and local government, but not providing the funding or the powers to do any enforcement. And that is the situation as the lead local flood authority we're in. We're very fortunate that as a council we've been able to invest more heavily in this area. We're a well-managed council and we've been able to put more money into the local flood role and also into some of the defence work that we need to do. But the elephant in the room from the conversation this morning is funding. Climate change is bringing more regular extreme weather events. That is the lead on the Environment Agency press release this morning. We've heard that they are 30 million short in terms of the funding needed to repair the defences from last year's storms. They've mentioned 25% is all they have of what they actually need. So the question is who the hell is lobbying for the work of the Environment Agency within government, within Treasury? Because we can't go on in a situation where these events are more frequent and more extreme, and we don't find solutions to actually protecting our communities and our long-term plan economically and otherwise for the county. We have a proposition that, you know, chimney pots are more important in concentrations than those in rural areas. Well, Lincolnshire is a rural county. Most of you on this committee, most of the members of the executive have rural areas that they look after. And it's not going to be a palatable truth to tell them that they will not get their defences repaired or they won't be protected from flooding because they don't count. So government needs to be convinced of the need to protect better our communities and invest more in flood defence works. At the end of the day, we've just found £22 billion for carbon capture and storage, a technology not yet proven, but the events that we dealt with last winter are real. They're today. They're not 1 in 100 year events. These are events that are going to happen more frequently. So we need to deal with that funding issue. And I'll do whatever I can, and I'm sure the council will want to do everything it can to lobby government to make the work of the Environment Agency more deliverable with the funding that they need. But the elephant in the room is funding, and we're not going to solve some of our long-term problems unless the funding issue is addressed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. And I genuinely couldn't agree more with what you've said. We get as much flood risk and water management as we're prepared to pay for, be it as a country, as a county, as a community. So they entirely endorse what you say. Colleagues, I don't see anyone else wishing to speak on this item. I appreciate we've given it a fairly robust going over. And on that basis, I'm happy that we note the Environment Agency's update on their projects and capital schemes, and that the comments that come up in the debate will be provided, retained as feedback, and there are obviously items that we look forward to receiving from them and we can pick up in future meetings. I am in your hands if you would like a 5-minute coffee break, or if you're happy to press on with the Anglian Water update, Drainage Board updates and work programmes. If you have to do that, I'm very happy. Equally, if any of you need to run out for a coffee while we're going through, I won't be remotely offended. So with that, I'll hand over to Matt Moore for the Anglian Water update.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. So I will just reference some of the points that have been raised over the course of today, if that's okay, an update on 2 key points, one of which obviously is Tallington and the other one being Stickney. I just want to reference a point that Councillor Baxter and Councillor Davey made about the blue pipes plaguing Lincolnshire's landscape. Our CEO has held a meeting with Councillor Hill, leader of the council, I believe, and have made the reasons for this delay quite clear. But for transparency and for public note, the reasons for these delays are twofold. The first delay is the fact that our abstraction licences in Essex are running out quicker than those in other areas. So there is a real desire to get these moved on quickly, and priority is given therefore to the south of the Anglian Water region rather than the north. The second reason is around managing the land. When we were on site in winter last year, we made quite a mess of a lot of land caused by working in wet and boggy conditions. So we are working with local landowners to make sure that we are going in there at the right point to get this work done. So as I said, our public engagement team around SPA, our strategic pipeline lines, are having these ongoing conversations with Councillor Hill, and our CEO is involved in those, but I just wanted to get those noted for the minutes and for the to answer one of the point that Councillor Baxter raised. Councillor Reid, you made a point about surface water and the water company adopting, having responsibilities of it no matter what. It's factually incorrect, I'm afraid. In Greatford, we have a VAC system. We have no surface water whatsoever. That might explain why Richard is so involved there, because the surface water infrastructure is likely to belong to highways. That may be why Richard is so involved in that. But I just wanted to correct the note that we do have surface water where it serves domestic properties, where it serves a domestic purpose. In Greatford, as I said, we have a VAC system, a foul VAC system. We don't have any surface water. Councillor Baxter, regarding the update on Tallington. So we have finished cleaning most of the culvert out. We've got 10 metres left to go. We've spent in excess of £185,000 doing this work on an asset that we dispute is actually ours, as you know, and we've had conversations about this. The complication and the delay around this has been namely Network Rail. The fact as soon as you call a meeting with Network Rail, there's a £2,000 bill sent to you just for having a meeting with them or just for getting them to site. Those charges are extreme, and I think they do need to be looked at. You can't realistically have an engaging partnership discussion with Network Rail without incurring a cost that then has to be paid. So far, Anglia Mortar has paid all of Network Rail's costs, and most costs have amounted to about £67,000 so far. We've got 10 metres left to go in Tallington. That will be the culvert completely clear. But as I said, that's not the solution, because unless we do something with the culvert, i.e. put a pipe inside the sand-bottom culvert, we'll just be back here in 2 years' time having to do the same again. So whilst this will make the surface water flow freely through Tallington, at least until the discharge point, and the open water course or riparian responsibility is another discussion we need to have. We were looking at including that in the wider cost of a scheme, because I believe you can't talk about the culvert in isolation without talking about the riparian culvert, the riparian water course that takes water from the culvert towards the IDB system, market deeping. So, and the honest truth about what's going on in Tallington is the cost of that scheme is likely to be 7 figures. Anglia Mortar, we've committed to funding £200,000 of that, but the rest of it will have to be found from partnership contributions, and I imagine grant and aid will play a key part in that. And the EA through Rhiannon Flowers is currently looking at what kind of grant and aid we can expect to get for Tallington to even see if this scheme is even affordable in its current position. That covers Tallington. Do you have any more comments on that? I'll just wait for come back on that.
Councillor Baxter, I'll bring in on that.
Thank you. Thank you for the update, which seems fairly consistent with what's happening locally. For 10 metres, presumably that's for 10 metres left that are underneath the railway line? Yes. It may be very expensive. Network Rail may be outrageous in their methods of working. I'm sure that the parish, district, county and the MPs would be keen to engage Network Rail and understand their reluctance to engage. I thought that they were getting to a point now where at least Network Rail were interested in fixing the problem, and I also understood that there was a what might be called an up and over solution that is being proposed as a temporary thing. There have been incidents in the last few weeks. There have been 2 incidents in the last 2 weeks at the junction. There have been 2 incidents in the last few weeks at the junction, and the owner hasn't moved back into the premises yet. So it may be 6 figures, it may be 7 figures. I understand that there's no magic money tree, but how do you fix it? Do we just shut down? Do we abandon Tallington to the water? What will happen? Where, if you've got 200,000, that leaves you 800,000 short. Who is going to be on your list of people to fund the rest of it? How is it ever going to get fixed if we're facing such a bill? And also the recalcitrance of Network Rail to even get involved. I understand what you're telling me, but what I can't hear is a solution to the problem.
So I wouldn't say Network Rail are being uncooperative. They are willing to, as they have done, but I just made the point it comes at a cost that currently Anglia Mortar is covering. It's not sustainable moving forward. That's the point I was trying to make. They are engaging and they're being quite helpful, but it does come at a cost. One of the only agencies, I believe, that can actually charge for attendance of such meetings, if only that existed for the water industry. To answer your point, and I think from what John's been saying this morning, it highlights the difficulties and the challenges around flood risk. The solutions are generally quite costly. and funding isn't so forthcoming. And the honest truth in the water industry is funding is being driven towards storm overflow reductions rather than flood risk, because politically that is a far louder lobby than flood risk is. That's not the ideal situation, but that's the situation we find ourselves in, that flood risk comes second to storm overflows in terms of the funding that Ofwat Ofwat provides to water companies. As I said, having said all that, £200,000 is not an insignificant amount of money given the size of Tallington. Add to that what Anglia Water's already spent, the £185,000 give or take, on clearing the culvert out and paying the various invoices from Network Rail. And we have really tried to tackle this problem given the funding available to us. The conversation isn't over. We are due to reconvene the multi-agency group later on in October, and one of the actions from the last meeting was for everyone to come back and say how much funding they can realistically attract. That may be 7 figures. If we can get the 7 figures or the very high 6-figure figure that we need, then we can proceed with this. Haven't given up hope on the fact this will happen. And if we can't find that funding, then we need to have another conversation on what we do to deal with the flood risk faced to those residents in Tallington and other areas where the cost of engineering solution outweighs the economic risk that funding can be provided for.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Matt for his candour, and I'm grateful that he and Morgan are not sending invoices for their time at this meeting.
Thank you. I appreciate I have the disadvantage of not being familiar with the Tallington problem as perhaps I would like to be. Picking up on the Network Rail are quoting you £2,000 every time you pick up the phone. Is this a culvert, is this a pipe, is this a channel which has been constructed after the railway was built and therefore it's your problem? Or is this a channel which existed before the railway was built, in which case I would suggest that the railway has a responsibility to be a damn sight more cooperative than they are being?
No one can quite recall. So we know Tallington, the culvert, was once an open water course. We know that from the nature of how the bottom is made up. When it was culverted I've no idea. What came first, a culvert or a railway line? One of the locals, Councillor Baxter, may well be able to answer that question. But Network Rail have suggested that this is a joint responsibility. So I don't quite know, to answer your question, Councillor Ashton, what the official position is. The fact is that we've taken the decision to pay for the majority of the work in the spirit of just getting on with it, rather than trying to debate about who's ultimately responsible for it.
I mean, that's great, but Network Rail should definitely not be charging you for their cooperation in that partnership. If they are accepting that it is a joint responsibility, then you can't say it's joint responsibility, but by the way, they're billing you £2,000, or else you could turn around and bill them £2,000 right back. I mean, I would just encourage a little bit of extra work to find out which came first, because it would perhaps give you a degree of extra bargaining power if in effect that channel predated the railway, which, if it was an open water course, it probably did. Then the railway has got more than just an obligation to be helpful. It's probably their problem, and if it is their problem, then, as I say, you've got maybe more ground for a bigger stick. But if I really hope that and I'm sure this committee and this council would be very keen to facilitate a better working relationship with Network Rail, because it does seem, frankly, absurd and unacceptable if we are treating this as a partnership and joint responsibility, that they are being so unhelpful and that they are seeking to charge. I mean, frankly, it wouldn't be unreasonable to ask on what basis they are seeking to charge their fees to engage, and if they can provide the evidence that the watercourse was there before the railway was built, then perhaps they would have a leg to stand on. But until they do, I don't see what ground, what justification they can have for charging to engage. Else every homeowner that's on the receiving end of enforcement action would be in a similar position, saying, well, we're not going to talk unless you pay us £2 to pick up. It's just not acceptable.
I would say the MP is very kindly having that conversation for us at a very strategic level.
Good. It would be useful just to keep us updated on how that's going, and also to understand whether this is just an issue at Tallington or whether we have a bigger problem with Network Rail than just this one. But carry on.
Yeah. So that covers Tallington for the moment. And Councillor Baxter, as I said, I believe you have a standing invite for those multi-agency groups should you wish to attend them. I wanted to pick up on something that that was said by Councillor Clark about Section 19's insurance companies. It's very, very important to point out that Section 19 is not a blame document. They're not a document to evidence who's liable or responsible for causing the flooding. They're a document to highlight under the Flood and Water Management Act which risk management authorities have a responsibility under the Act or an involvement under the Act, but they're not a blame document. So this idea that people can just send them to insurance companies and somehow get a magic payout is not accurate, and we should actively dispel this idea that that's likely to happen. Just to give you the factual sense that Anglian Water can only be prosecuted for flooding or taken to court for flooding if it's been proven that we have been negligent as an organisation. So just having mentioned under a Section 19 that we are ultimately involved in a Section 19 wouldn't constitute an insurance company taking action against a water company. I just wanted to dispel that rumour, really.
Thank you, colleagues. I've got Councillor Beale from earlier, and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Like many of us here, I serve on a couple of drainage boards. One of the drainage boards I sit on had the misfortune to find one of your water mains under our watercourse. It was repaired. We've asked for a GIS report from your good selves of your watercourses in our area. That's been declined. Cardant, from a gas perspective, have more than provided theirs. Can I ask for pressure to be applied, please, so that South Holland IDB and others are provided with the full GIS report of watercourses? Thank you.
So that's probably been declined because the assumption is it doesn't fall under the Flood and Water Management Act and our data sharing agreement. It does, because a watercourse under a water pipe under a water body does constitute potential flood risk. So I will remedy that immediately and get you the shape files. Which IDB was that, please? South Holland. I'll remedy the shape files and get them over to our contact at South Holland ASAP. And apologies for the confusion.
Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. Just for information, I never said anything about a magical payout. That's your words, not mine. What I did say is the fact that when people from Lincoln ring the Anglia Water Board up during the floods, they were told, nothing to do with us, ring Lincoln City Council. I can't work out why they was told to ring Lincoln City Council in the first place.
Yeah, sorry, this was another 2 bullet points I had. Apologies, Councillor Ashton. So yeah, scripting in our call centre, like most call centres, work off basic scripting. So the agents will follow, when you ring up, will follow a series of prompts, and they'll give an answer based on those prompts. That's how most call centres nowadays work. If someone rings up and says, I'm already flooded, and the water is coming from the road or from land aside, then they will advise the caller to either call fire and rescue or their local authority or district council as per the Civil Contingencies Act. we are, if someone's already flooded, there's not a lot Anglian Water can do. And I think I raised this point before in this chamber, that we can send out a technician with a van and a jetter on the back of it to clear blockages and to help where they can. That is not going to help a house that's already been flooded unless that flooded is in relation to a blocked pipe, a blocked sewer. You know, so with the best will in the world, if someone rings Anglian Water to ask for help, we can advise, but we can't help if someone's already flooded. It's probably too late. So just to clarify how that works. The other point I wanted to raise, Councillor Ashton, if that's okay, on my update was about Stickney and Stickford, which are the other areas we saw a lot of impact over the last 4 weeks. I know Councillor Bowkett has now left, which is a shame, but I just wanted to give an idea about the root cause of that flooding and where it came from. So what we saw in Stickford and Stickney, people saw it coming out of the foul sewer manholes and said, well, Anglian Water, this is your problem. The truth of the matter is that our water recycling centre in Stickney was completely inhibited. The water course was high, it wasn't overtopping, but it was high, and that stopped the discharge from our sewage works from being effective. That meant that the whole sewage system backs up, and ultimately, you know, if water can't escape, treated water can't escape into the water course, then untreated foul water can't gravitate to the water recycling centre. What that meant is that people saw surcharging of foul water out, of heavily diluted foul water out their manholes in those areas, and naturally caused a lot of concern. I was just talking to Morgan and Matt at the start of the meeting about what we do about legacy outfalls, you know, that were laid 50, 60 years ago in river levels and watercourses that were substantially deeper than they are now. You know, you can't just, with a gravity system, you can't just replumb it to make it discharge higher, because all the levels are geared from where it discharges back up in the network to ensure you get an appropriate amount of fall. So there is a wider conversation that I think we need to have nationally, not just locally, nationally, on what we do with discharges that sit now either in the silt level or below the standard operating level of watercourses. Because that has caused flooding in Stickney and Stickford, but if, as per the Environment Agency's definition of flooding, the water remained within the banks of the watercourse, and therefore that's not a flooding. So there's a national debate here about how our assets interact with IDB assets, with riparian assets, with EA assets, and how we actually make sure that from a catchment-based approach, how we actually get flooding right. Because the flooding that we saw recently, and it's been at Carhome Road for years, you know, our discharge into the Foss Dyke at Carhome Road has suffered with the same problem. It's been sat in the silt level, unable to discharge mostly, and that's why we get flooding on Carhome Road. But you can't just lift the level of a discharge because it all gravitates towards that single point. That sums up my update. Thank you.
Thank you. Just while you mentioned the issues that Councillor Bowkett is dealing with, she had to go to another meeting, but has left me with a few questions, I think some of which you've covered, but I will read through them, and if you can just pick up on them, anything that would be useful, that would be helpful. Can I ask you about the last week's issues, obviously Stickney and Stickford, 2 houses on Hall Lane, the suggestion that the pump is not sufficient on the junction of West Fen Lane. The 2 houses had sewage backing up in the garden, and there's a question on needing non-return valves urgently, and Councillor Bowkett is meeting with Katie next week, if I understand, as Anglian Water operative, to discuss which household would like to go ahead. I presume that's with non-return valves, but if there's anything that you could do to help with that, I'm sure she'd be most grateful.
Yeah, Katie's our regional network manager. Non-return valves are okay. They are a type of mitigation. So what they do is they stop sewage from coming back towards properties when the system's surcharged, and allows properties a certain amount of capacity for their own sewage. Now, that works to a certain point. If you have a storm event that lasts 2, 3 or 4 days, and people are flushing their toilets, emptying their baths, running their appliances, and it takes up that capacity, they'll have the same problem. But they do offer an element of help. there is a slight caveat to all that, is that we can offer non-return valves where there's no proven detriment elsewhere. What we wouldn't do is invest in non-return valve if it's just going to flood the next door neighbour and just make that the next lowest point. Unfortunately, in every catchment we have hydraulically, there is always a lowest point, whether you're talking about domestic properties, whether you're talking about surface water management, river levels, there's always a lowest point that will get flooded first. And if fitting a series of non-return valves just constantly shifts that lowest point to another property, we suddenly find ourselves investing a vast amount of money. We've not solved anything, we've just made it okay for the properties that have raised these issues before. But she is aware of the root cause. Non-return valves we have said we will look at, and Katie will look at that next week.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Haig, then Fleetwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. I'm going to start by being very disappointed with not only you personally, but with Anglian Water. This Friday will mark 8 months since I asked you about the sewage treatment works at Silt Willoughby, whether there was a problem with the sewage treatment works, whether there was a problem with the drainage, the fact that some of the properties could not use their downstairs toilets and sinks when even normal rainfall had come. So I'm incredibly disappointed that after 8 months I've still yet to get a reply from you, Matt, or from a member of the team. When I looked after a department in Anglian Water, the first thing that I insisted on was when somebody from outside was expecting a response, that they got a response, even if it was to say that's still being investigated, we'll get back to you when you've got an answer. So I can't say anything more than that without losing my rag. The second question I've got is regarding storm overflows. Does Anglian Water have just monitors there when they're running, or do they have meters there so that we know the amount of sewage coming out of the storm overflow, so that we have a quantity that this group can compare? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, I will make a call when I'm still here about Silt Willoughby, because I was under the impression a reply had been given to you, but if that's not happened, I apologise. In regards to CSOs, so the monitoring map is live on our website, it's publicly available. The sensors unfortunately work on the notion that the flap is elevated. So all our storm overflows have a flap valve to stop water getting back into the system, and there's a sensor on that flap that senses when it's raised, and as soon as a flap raises slightly, it assumes there's an overflow in progress. That's the standard of all that all water companies are working to. We haven't got to the point yet of putting flow meters on our storm overflows, but it is something the industry is looking at.
Thank you. And Councillor Fleetwood, please.
On the basis that everyone's being parochial, I attend Langworth Parish Council meeting nearly every month. I'd like to think most months. And on a regular basis, the chairman talks to me about letters he's written to emails that have been sent to Anglian Water, and he isn't getting a response. Please, can you get back to him? It would make my life a little bit more bearable.
I know the letter in question because I know our new CEO asked me for comments on it. We provided comments, and I know for a fact our CEO went back, because I saw the letter that went back to the chair of the parish council, so I can say with an absolute 100% certainty that has been responded to.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else wishing to come in, so genuinely thank you, Matt, for those comments and that report, which I think we can all regard as having been noted. And any feedback and points, I'm sure Councillor Hayes will look forward to getting his response very promptly. And That takes us on to item 8, which is the Internal Drainage Board report, pages 63 to 66. Thank you, Peter, for being incredibly patient while we have gone through the last 3.5 hours, but welcome and thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Chairman. It's a very short report, but there's some very big issues in it. Could you get it up on screen for me, Jess? Thanks. It was the couple of pages before that, which members should have already seen. So I asked the IDB community, we meet regularly as a group of chief executives, to just highlight issues, and a couple of them have come up today already. One is the recovery sums, and a second one, which I'll articulate in a minute, is on Highland water payments. So we were very pleased when we signed our accounts off in March, and most IDBs in the county had very depleted general reserves as a result of all the work that went into Babette and Henk. To have heard the then Prime Minister announce this £75 million recovery fund, which every IDB in Lincolnshire has applied for, which came in 2 tranches, as you're aware. Tranche 1 was to deal with the costs of dealing with the floods last year, and the second was to deal with asset repairs and replacement for those assets damaged. There's a summary there showing you the sums involved, but I think there was 25 million in tranche 1 nationally, and we probably had around 8 million in Lincolnshire, so we sort of punched above our weight. That's good news, A, because it's restored our general reserves back to where they needed to be. Most IDBs keep sort of 20 to 30% of their annual expenditure in reserves to cope with events like storm events, so that we've got enough funding that exceeds our normal budgetary sums. So that was good news. The bad news is the timing. It was announced in February, and most boards in Lincolnshire didn't start to receive funds till September, and that's tranche 1. Tranche 2, which is the larger portion of the fund, still hasn't been A, agreed, and B, distributed. Now, this is an issue because there is a backstop of the 31st of March 2025, and we're talking of multi-million-pound replacements of pumps, repairs, slip repairs, all the things which were damaged in those 2 storms, and a completely unrealistic view by Treasury and the national EA team responsible for this, that IDBs, which have small management teams, half my management team is here, to deliver this stuff is virtually impossible, particularly where we're using contractors and we're all using the same firms. We try and buy local. So that's a huge issue. Most IDBs believe that the tranche 1 fundings they've received will cover their costs from last year and will start to do a bit of asset repair, but it remains to be seen whether the tranche 2 funding comes in time. And my chief engineer gave me to the 15th of October. He said if we hadn't heard about it then, we are really going to struggle to deliver it by 31st of March. These are outdoor works, they're weather dependent, and we've seen what weather can do. So it is good news, but it's a sort of bittersweet, because I'm not sure we're going to be able to spend it all, unless Treasury decide to relax the spend deadline by 12 months, which will help everybody, and certainly most of the people in this room. Some of the standing recovery works had a question about pumping stations. I think there's some dialogue going on nationally about pumping stations and whether or not replacing a pump directly extends the life of the pumping station, which brings into play EEL regulations, which means it's not a straightforward swap. And again, that's just another delay that those IDBs can do without, particularly the IDBs around Lincoln, the Witham First, Witham Third and Upper, who have, I think, as of the tour we went on last week, something like 17 pumping stations out of operation. So to answer Councillor Fleetwood's point, are we prepared for another event? No, we are not. And the results will be far worse if we had another Storm Babette, because half the assets aren't operating. That's in those 3 boards. It's not across the county. Concerns which boards expressed about other lack of recovery, and there's some points there about breach repairs, and I think we've had enough dialogue on those, and I'm pleased to see that those that have been repaired and those that haven't are in programme to be repaired. I'm sure we'll get a timescale for that when Morgan shares that information around. The big issue which has come up and literally only cropped up last month is Highland Water, and there's some figures which we'll put on the screen in a second. Highland Water payments are paid to IDBs who take Highland water from a Highland catchment, which would normally go into a main river, but ends up being pumped out of a lowland catchment. And those IDBs obviously are only funded from ratepayers and special levy payers in those districts to deal with lowland water. So any Highland water is, that they deal with is paid for by the Environment Agency through Highland Water payments. And this is an arrangement that's been going on since the early 80s. And for the first time ever this year, the Environment Agency locally, and I'm sure due to pressures on funding nationally, announced they weren't going to pay the whole Highland Water payment with 2 weeks' notice to the payment date. And the figures that are involved for IDBs in Lincolnshire are shown up there on the screen. So out of a potential return of £1 million, there's 367,000 not going to be paid. And that's assuming no further payments from the EA this financial year. Now, that figure in terms of the total budget of IDBs isn't significant, but most of it falls on a couple of IDBs you can see there, Upper Witham and Witham Third. So to have that amount taken out of in-year budgets and to be able to cope with that on the back of all of the costs that we've had from the previous 12 months is going to be a big ask. And the reason it's an issue for people in this room is because if that needs to be replenished somehow, it's going to have to go on the rate next year, which of course affects special levies. And you're well aware from the meeting you had in Parliament earlier this week how much of an issue that is for those councils that have IDBs in their area. So it's a huge issue, and it has been flagged up to Lee Edlin, who's the area director, and I'm sure it's going to be discussed on Friday's RFCC meeting, because I believe he is trying to find some local funding to resolve that. But that doesn't mean it's guaranteed for future years, but it'll solve the current year problem. So it is a big, big issue. It has been challenged in the past. I think in the early 80s, one of the Lincoln boards challenged the payment of Highland Water when it was withdrawn from the River Authority at the time, and it went through court and they duly had to pay Highland Water. It is part of the Land Drainage Act that if an IDB pumps Highland Water, they should be paid to do so. So it's not a discretionary payment, it's actually in the Act. But at the minute, it's been an informal announcement. We've not had a formal notice, and if IDBs want to appeal the withdrawal of Highland Water, there has to be a formal notice given so that they can go through the relevant appeals process, and that hasn't happened. And again, that's something Lee Edlin is looking at. So not great news, but news.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. I mean, just some comments from me on the back of what you've said to us there. That tranche 2 funding, it strikes me as though the government, the Treasury, is operating a funding model closer to that operated by a voucher. I don't know if ever you've seen the fantastic deals that you can get on there. You can have a holiday in the sun for 3 shillings and sixpence, just on the condition that you get a plane that takes off at an impossible time from an airport that's impossible to get to. And you know, here we are. We've got government saying you can have 11.5 million, but you've got to spend it by a period of time which it is getting next to impossible to actually physically spend it. And not only that, if we are to be if we are expecting government, I mean, we live in hope that government will be custodians of public money, but realistically they probably aren't. When they are setting targets such as this, it means that the priorities for spend are probably not the priorities that boards would otherwise go for if they had 2 or 3 years to spend it. You know, this idea that money is given on condition that it can be shoveled out of the door as quickly as possible by an arbitrary Treasury deadline is just not realistic. It's not good value for money, and it's not providing the level of flood risk and water management protection that we expect in Lincolnshire. It really is ridiculous. it was ridiculous when it was announced, but with the delays that have now been introduced into that system, the delays that we've in authorising that spend, has made what was already a very, very, very difficult job all but, and in some cases perhaps already, impossible. The issue that you raise in relation to Highland Water cuts to the very core of what drainage boards are there for, and it's what I alluded to in my opening remarks this evening. It is still frightening how many people mistake that drainage boards exist primarily and ideally solely to drain only the water that falls out of the sky onto their catchment. Peter's maybe a little bit bit too modest to say what those figures on that chart really does, and that's that Witham Forth is the most perfectly designed drainage board catchment that I've yet seen, because there are catch waters currently maintained, arguably inadequately, that take the water off of the highland, take it across the fen and out to sea. And the Environment Agency is responsible for maintaining those catch water systems, responsible for maintaining that conveyance to get that water from the foothills of the Wolds across the fen and out at the Maud Foster next to Boston Dock. But clearly there are the other drainage boards that we have in Lincolnshire were not quite so perfectly designed in such a way that they take that water from areas outside of their own catchment into their catchment and have to process it. And it feels to be incredibly short-sighted, demonstrably unfair, and a long way beyond the spirit of both partnership and the way that flood risk and water management responsibilities are divided up in this county, to expect drainage districts to pay for the discharge of water that is entering into them from outside of their catchment. Because the people that live in those catchments, if they're a farmer, they're paying £25 a hectare towards the drainage of their land. If you're a homeowner, you're paying £60 on your council tax or thereabouts to keep your property dry. That you should then have to pay a bit extra to drain the water that's coming in, that in a perfectly designed system wouldn't be there, really is manifestly unfair, because the people that are already paying significantly towards their own drainage are in effect being asked to pay again for the drainage, for draining water that's come in from outside. And I mean, it's good to hear that there is perhaps a will at a Lincoln Northamptonshire level, at a local level, to try and find a way through this. And I'm always mindful, you know, Morgan comes to our meetings to defend the Environment Agency, but these are decisions that are taken at a much higher level in that organisation, and it is only right and proper that that responsibility is placed at the door at the level of our partners' organisation, where that responsibility genuinely lies. And I certainly wouldn't blame Morgan for any of this, or Lee, or any of the local team for these decisions, because the one message that runs through all of what we've deliberated in this committee and other forums for the last year is that at a local level, our operatives that we have working in this area for the Environment Agency really do get it and really do care, and I imagine they're as galled at this as everybody else is. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Peter? Councillor Fleetwood and Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I share the majority of your comments and agree with them, but being a businessman, I would just simply say, if you have a bill and it's sent to you, you pay it. If you don't pay it, you suffer the consequences. If you need to be seen by your partners to be ethical and working correctly, I think it's due performance to actually do that. So I thoroughly support the drainage boards with how they're going forwards with regard to any issues, either be it I've alluded to it all the way through the meeting, be it to be within the resources of whether it's supporting the local landowners, or if it's to actually recover whatever costs have been implicated on them at whatever level.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Mine's more a question for Morgan rather than a question for Peter, and it's based on page 65 of the report pack, Appendix A at the bottom corner there, and it's a comment from Black Sloughs IDB. It says there's both two sites on the South 40-foot drain. The EA are planning to only repair to the level before the overtopping, so as to build back higher would, in their opinion, just move the problem elsewhere. And this means that the low spots will remain in the same place, and next time it will overtop at the same level in the same places instead of increasing the resilience level. What is there? I mean, I know it explains the thinking there, but I don't agree with it. I wonder how many others do. It would seem sensible to improve the level of defence there, or the level of protection, rather than just let it keep overtopping and causing the same damage over and over again.
Morgan, can you help?
Yeah, without getting into the detail, generally when we do sort of recovery work, the funding that we have is to put back, you know, what was there prior to any damage, to instigate an improvement scheme. So, you know, improving the standard of flood protection would require, you know, us to look into the costs and benefits to a lot greater extent. And in scenarios such as this, it's unlikely that, you know, we would find the justification to be able to do that. And as you say, you know, without the sort of the modelling in place to understand, you know, what would be impacted by your actions, like you say, you could be forcing the water into other locations, and a constant sort of race for the sky, so to speak, you know, in terms of, instead of building defences higher and higher, obviously as you go higher, you need to, the land take is so much greater as well. So there's all sorts of factors with it, with increasing the heights of flood defences, and as John said earlier, going forward, you know, we're going to have to look for more opportunities to store flood water within the environment, because we can't continue to make the defences higher and the outfalls larger.
Yeah, the bit I don't quite understand is these are low spots, so it'd be bringing them up to at least a level that isn't making it not a low spot, but line up with everything else. And
I think where you're referring to, I think obviously where there are localised low spots, i.e. demonstrable sort of like dips in the, you know, over you know, a couple of metres, you know, that would make perfect sense to sort of even those out. But I think maybe the low spots you're referring to are over to some quite long distances, which would require quite a re-engineering of the embankment.
yeah, thank you. I promised I'd bring it up, and I have, and yeah, thank you.
If it's anything similar to the experience we had with Coningsby Ings, my understanding at that location is that there was funding to repair the bank to the height that it was prior to the breach, but were a proposal put forward to try and increase the height of the bank at that location, there wouldn't be a single penny piece of funding towards putting a single shovelful of muck in the hole at all. Again, I suppose that again it comes down to what the framework for some of this stuff is that lies a lot deeper than what we're dealing with at a Lincolnshire level. Anybody else? Any questions on these items? Nobody indicating. I would just wonder if we have an opportunity here as a council to lend, picking up on the comment that's been made, to lend support to the case that our internal drainage boards are making to us today, both in addressing that, the ridiculousness of that tranche 2 funding and the timetable for delivering it with Treasury and with DEFRA, and also raising at a DEFRA level the issue that we have on the table with Highland Water. Because again, like I say, it feels inappropriate to land this on the desk of local EA. It has to go quite a bit higher. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. I'd be quite happy to second the comments you've just made, and also to add in that a solution for the general funding of IDBs is long overdue, and would welcome it from this government or any government. Thanks.
Thank you. To that end, what I was about to suggest is that that if we, as a committee, ask Councillor Davey as the Executive Councillor to write on behalf of the Council to pick up those issues with DEFRA and the Flood Minister, then I'm happy to propose that. If you're happy to second, Councillor Baxter, a show of hands that we endorse that. Brilliant. Thank you. I'm sure the Minister will write us a lovely letter back saying how she's going to take immediate action to resolve.
Chairman, can I just add, I just heard your debate there. Very happy to send that letter on behalf of the committee and ensure that we raise this issue at the highest level. I'll therefore task Matthew in consultation with yourself and myself to draft that letter, and we'll get it sent as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey, for your support in that. It really is appreciated, and if we can, as I say, put that our shoulder to the wheel as the lead local flood authority on this, hopefully it does move that dial just a little bit. So genuinely thank you. That brings us on to our Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee work programme on pages 67 to 68. Thank you, Councillor Baxter, of the agenda pack. Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just ask members of the committee to look at page 68, which lists the items for the next formal committee meeting on the 20th of January. In addition to the standard items, there's an item on the special levies, the special interest group on drainage board levies. So that's on the 20th of January in addition to the other standard items. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any things that they'd like to add to that? I just have a suggestion, which is really more me thinking out loud from some research that I've been doing over recent weeks and months. As we heard from Councillor Davies, as we all pick up in debate from time to time, we are acutely aware of the significant shortfall in funding for flood risk and water management, particularly on main rivers, particularly among our partner organisations. And to the extent that I think the picture is clearly emerging that the Environment Agency doesn't have enough money to do what it wants to do, let alone the things we want them to do, let alone the things that our residents expect them to do. And there are other parts of the country that also have addressed similar things, similar challenges over recent years, one of which is Somerset. They, a few years ago, established a Somerset Rivers Authority, which is effectively a committee of their then county council, now a unitary council, that bring together partners. But it did, when it was created in the aftermath of the, I think, 2013 floods down there, was given tax-raising powers as a one-off thing to give it a budget to do its work. And occasionally I come across people from Somerset and ask a few questions around this. But cutting to the chase, they have a meeting coming up. I think their next meeting of their Rivers Authority is in January, after our meeting in January, but towards the end of January. I just wondered if there was any interest. I would like to sort of say hello to them and see if there's any, if they'd be willing to have a chat to me. I just wonder whether that would be of something of an interest to other members of the committee, if you'd be interested in meeting with them, seeing them, talking to them, understanding how that system works and the rest of it. And obviously we could have a conversation between me and Jess and Simon as to whether that would be appropriate or able to operate. I don't know. I'm happy. I'm in your hands, colleagues. Councillor Ashley Morris.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the actual geography is so similar with the Somerset levels that were single-handedly flooded by the Environment Agency, but that's my own personal thing. And obviously the hilly areas that drain down towards that. And they've done a really, really good and quite imaginative way of dealing with all of it. And I think it would be really valuable to go and have a look and talk and see if there's anything we can bring back to here that would be of use. Thanks.
Seeing nobody saying no, let's explore options. Let's see. They may not want to cope with all of us lot. We may not all be able to get down there, but let's just have a conversation and see what we can put together. Again, acutely aware that we are yet to have our proper study tour this year with the committee to go and look at Lincolnshire projects. I appreciate we had a lot had quite a lot of looking around at things that had flooded earlier part of the year, but it's probably not really quite the same thing. That I think brings us to the end of today's agenda. Genuinely, thank you everybody for your contributions. Peter, Morgan, Matt, John, Matthew, for presenting to us today. Councillor colleagues for sitting through what has been very nearly 4 hours of this. You may notice, colleagues, those of you that are on different scrutiny committees, that sometimes there is the suggestion that that the chairman will take reports as read and cut debate short and move it on in order to keep to time. Well, I make no apology for saying that, in my view, I would rather we had 4 hours of meaningful debate and be late for lunch than cut it short and get into the canteen on time. So genuinely, thank you for your patience. I think we have had a robust debate on a lot of really important issues, and I will declare the meeting closed. Oh, we're offline. And now we're offline, appreciating that our working group should have started 25 minutes ago. We haven't had a break. I am